Hi, everybody. Welcome. Tonight we'll be slowly unraveling a deeply intricate story, one that winds its way through shadowy castle corridors, candlelit royal courts, and the tightly woven bloodlines of medieval Europe. Our tale centers on some of the most inbred women in medieval history, women born into dynasties that prized pure lineage over health or happiness. These women were queens, duchesses, empresses, but they were also daughters of a family tree that forked back onto itself again and again. In the pursuit of alliances, land, and power, their families made decisions that shaped empires, but at great personal cost. What did it mean to live a life crafted by politics and hemmed in by genetics? In 24 parts, we'll explore their lives, one by one, thread by thread. Every section will drift gently through their stories, the early childhoods that hinted at quiet despair, the young marriages to men they often barely knew, the slow decay of health and hope, and the remarkable ways they still managed to leave a mark on history. Let's begin. Tonight's first part, a girl named Juana. She was born on a bitterly cold November morning in 1479 in the city of Toledo, Spain. Her name was Juana of Castile, but history remembers her by another name, Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Even as an infant, Juana was watched closely, not out of concern for her health, but because she was a Habsburg. Her mother, Isabella I of Castile, was one of the most formidable monarchs of the era, intelligent, iron-willed, and devout. Her father, Ferdinand II of Aragon, was equally powerful. Together, they united Spain. Their union would eventually make Juana a key figure in one of the most genetically entangled royal houses in history. The Habsburgs had a particular belief that power was best kept within the family. They married cousins to cousins, uncles to nieces, even great-nieces to great-uncles. The bloodlines twisted and curved into unnatural shapes until what began as noble intention turned into slow genetic collapse. Juana, though, began life healthy, at least outwardly. She had thick auburn hair, piercing eyes, and the reserved manner expected of a royal daughter. Her tutors remarked that she was highly intelligent, better than her brothers even. She could read and write Latin by age 7. She played music. She spoke several languages. But that brilliance always came wrapped in a strange stillness, a quiet that worried the ladies of the court. By the time Juana was 10, the quiet had turned into silence. She would sometimes stop mid-sentence, eyes blank, as if listening to something no one else could hear. She cried in the night, alone in her chambers. But in a world obsessed with control, emotions were dangerous, so her ladies were told to ignore the crying. Punishment was preferred over inquiry. At 13, Juana was betrothed to a boy she'd never met, Philip the Handsome, Duke of Burgundy. He was Habsburg too. Their family tree met in more than one place. The marriage was political. She would bring Spain's alliance. He would bring Flanders' wealth. Love was neither required nor expected. The journey to meet him was long and storm-lashed. Juana became violently seasick crossing to Flanders. When she arrived damp and pale, she met her husband for the first time. He was golden-haired and famously beautiful, and shockingly, something happened. Juana fell in love, not the courtly arranged affection of princesses, a wild, reckless love that consumed her. She clung to him, wept for him when he left her side, refused to eat when he traveled. And Philip, he was kind at first, then cold, then cruel. He had mistresses, many, and when Juana wept, he laughed. The court watched in silence. A foreign princess, trembling with passion, a husband avoiding her bed, a bride more obsessed than loved. When Juana gave birth to their first child, a daughter, she refused to let anyone else touch the baby. Servants whispered that she was mad. She refused to bathe, refused to sleep, claimed that other women were trying to steal her husband. At night, she roamed the halls barefoot, muttering. Her hair was uncombed, her eyes glassy, and yet she was also still sharp. She wrote letters to her parents in perfect Castilian. She negotiated treaties when Philip was drunk or distracted. She remembered court protocols that even her husband forgot. Her madness came in waves, like a tide that receded and returned. When her mother died, Juana became Queen of Castile, in name. But Philip refused to let her rule. He locked her in her chambers when she tried to issue decrees. When she screamed, he told the court she was hysterical. When she cried, he told the court she was insane. Then one night, he died, suddenly. A fever, they said. Poison, others whispered. Juana crumbled. She refused to bury the body. She kept his casket beside her bed, so it opened it sometimes to kiss the corpse's forehead. The court was horrified, but Juana was unmovable. Her love had become eternal. Her father Ferdinand came to take control. He declared her insane. Her son Charles, later Emperor Charles V, kept her locked away for nearly 50 years. She died in a cold stone palace in Tordesillas, alone. And yet, she remained Queen of Castile. Legally, she was never deposed. Her bloodline flowed into every Habsburg that came after her, including those whose jaws wouldn't open fully, whose skulls bulged from the pressure of intermarriage, whose bodies twisted under the weight of too much sameness. Juana la Loca, was she mad? Or simply broken by love and betrayal, in a world that demanded silence from its women? That question still drifts through the shadows of history, and we will let it rest there for tonight, until tomorrow, when we meet another woman shaped by a bloodline not of her choosing. In the cold mists of the early 16th century, as Spain grappled with Juana's strange reign and quiet captivity, another royal girl was being born far to the east, wrapped not in the golden warmth of Iberian sun, but in the damp solemnity of the Austrian Alps. Her name was Anna of Austria, and her life would become a quiet echo of Juana's, wrapped in velvet and ritual, yet similarly suffocated by the web of Habsburg blood. Anna was born in 1549, the daughter of Emperor Maximilian II and Maria of Spain. This alone should raise a quiet chill, because Maria was Juana's granddaughter, which meant that Anna was the product of a union between first cousins, the kind of marriage that had already begun to fray the edges of the Habsburg genetic tapestry. She was born into expectations, not of greatness necessarily, but of obedience. Her life was not her own. From infancy, Anna's day was carved into pieces. Mass before sunrise, long hours with stern tutors, the strict recitation of Latin prayers, lessons in embroidery and court decorum. The court around her was richly adorned, yet always dim. Chandeliers flickered in stone corridors. Heavy incense masked the dampness. The weight of empire lingered on every surface. Anna was a quiet child, solemn with wide dark eyes and a placid expression that rarely shifted. Visitors noted her grace, but they also whispered about the stiffness in her joints, the faint tremor in her hands, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. She was pious, deeply so. At age 7, she begged to take confession daily. By age 10, she refused to laugh at court entertainments, insisting that joy should be reserved for heaven. When she turned 15, Anna was promised to her uncle, not a distant cousin, not a noble from another court, her uncle, Philip II of Spain, the son of Juana la Loca, a man nearly twice her age, known for his unwavering Catholicism, cold demeanor, and ruthlessly methodical mind. He was already widowed 3 times, and he wanted an heir. Anna's Habsburg blood was pure. That was enough. She sailed from Austria in silence, her letters home full of religious platitudes and small details about the ship's chapel. When she arrived in Madrid, the wedding was held with somber grandeur. There were golden altars, velvet banners, and incense thick enough to choke. Anna wore pearls that once belonged to Isabella the Catholic. She did not cry. As queen, Anna became known for her calm. Her smile was gentle but distant. She bore it all, the icy silences, the endless protocol, the demands of childbirth. She gave Philip 5 children in 9 years, but the strain began to show. Her body, like that of many Habsburg women, was frail. Her pregnancies were difficult. Her deliveries, long and dangerous. One physician noted that her hips were unusually narrow, her jaw tightly set even during unconsciousness. After her 5th child, another son, one who would become the ill-fated Philip III, Anna never fully recovered. Her skin grew pale, her movements slowed, her eyes seemed to retreat inward, and yet she smiled, always. The court adored her, not for her charisma, which was faint, but for her patience. She never raised her voice, never questioned her husband, never resisted the chain of rituals that bound her to the altar and the throne. But in private, the silence was deeper. There were rumors, soft and quickly hushed, that Anna spoke to shadows in her chambers, that she refused to sleep in the dark, that she sometimes trembled during Mass. Her confessor noted her increasing penance, hours on her knees, lashes on her back, fasting until her lips cracked. Was it devotion or something darker? One lady-in-waiting later wrote that Anna often spoke as if she were already dead. "I am only here for God's will," she once murmured, "and his will shall end me when he sees fit." It ended quickly. In 1580, a fever swept through the palace. Anna fell ill first. She refused most treatments, believing that her suffering might purify her soul. Within days, her temperature spiked. She began to hallucinate. She spoke in Latin verses. She called for her mother, long dead. And finally, she died in her sleep, lips parted in prayer. She was 30. Her husband, Philip II, grieved privately. He wore black until his death, but he did not remarry. His Habsburg line was secure, and with it came the legacy of Anna. Her blood, her genes, her fragile body echoed in her children and grandchildren. Among them was the infamous Philip IV, who would marry his niece. And from that union would come Charles II, the most visibly inbred monarch in European history. But that is not Anna's story. Anna's story is softer, quieter. She was a woman whose body bore the weight of centuries of strategic marriage. A woman so gentle, so obedient, that her suffering was mistaken for sanctity. She lived in palaces and chapels, gave life to kings, and yet disappeared from memory like a dream upon waking. Perhaps that was her deepest tragedy. Not that she was broken, but that she was invisible. Next, we'll step into the world of France, where another queen, born of incestuous blood, would find her own legacy not in prayer, but in scandal. But that will wait for another night. Sleep well. The court of France, glittering and theatrical, has always seemed a world apart from the somber severity of Spain or the calculating chill of Austria. In the 17th century, however, the marble galleries of Versailles concealed their own entanglements, bloodlines just as twisted, secrets just as dark. And within this world of powder, perfume, and polished lies, there lived a woman whose life story spiraled out of the same genetic design, Marie-Louise d'Orléans. She was born in 1662 to a marriage that was both celebrated and troubling. Her father, Philippe I, Duke of Orleans, was the younger brother of King Louis XIV. Her mother, Henrietta of England, was herself the daughter of King Charles I. Both parents carried not just royal blood, but identical ancestry in more than one branch. Marie-Louise's pedigree was almost too pure, and in that excessive refinement lay her fate. From the beginning, she was delicate. Not the poetic delicacy of court poetry, but something more physical. Her limbs too thin, her mouth always downturned in a tight, pale frown. She seldom laughed, and when she did, it came out sharp like the crack of breaking glass. Her eyes were large and deeply set, with a permanent glimmer of apprehension, as though even the golden light of Versailles was too bright for her. As a child, she was taught to move with grace and silence. Her mother believed in discretion above all. A princess, Henrietta once whispered to her, must never show desire, not for food, not for comfort, not even for love. Marie-Louise listened and learned. But her home was not quiet. Her father, Philippe, was flamboyant and mercurial. Known for his elaborate wigs and powdered makeup, he paraded his lovers openly, often humiliating his wife in public. The palace air was filled with rivalries, pettiness, and whispers. Marie-Louise absorbed it all, not as drama, but as dread. She grew up believing that love was a dangerous thing and that marriage was a performance. When she was 17, her uncle, King Louis XIV, made a decision. Marie-Louise would be married to King Charles II of Spain, a union between Bourbon and Habsburg meant to secure peace and keep alliances tight. The French court rejoiced, but no one asked Marie-Louise what she wanted. Charles II was infamous, even then, a boy king with a misshapen jaw, an oversized tongue, and the haunted eyes of a child who never escaped the nursery. The result of generations of Habsburg inbreeding, he could barely chew food, spoke with a slur, and suffered frequent seizures. Doctors had little hope he would live into adulthood, but he had one purpose: to produce an heir. So Marie-Louise was sent to him. The journey to Madrid was long and ominous. She wept silently each night, but never openly protested. At the French border, she crossed into Spanish territory, where all her French clothes, servants, books, and even her dog were taken from her. She was dressed in severe Spanish fashion, high collars, black lace, and introduced to her new court, a place colder and stricter than she'd ever imagined. When she met Charles for the first time, she froze. He tried to kiss her hand, but his mouth hung open and wet. His teeth jutted in crooked patterns. His body twitched as he walked, yet he smiled at her with an innocent, almost pitiful hope. Marie-Louise did not smile back. The marriage was performed swiftly. The court feasted, but the bride was silent. On her wedding night, she fainted before entering the bedchamber. Charles tried to comfort her, but his presence seemed only to deepen her fear. No child would ever come from their union. In the years that followed, Marie-Louise became a ghost at court. She fulfilled her duties, bowed at mass, smiled in public, but privately she withdrew. Her health declined. Her appetite vanished. She wandered the palace gardens at dusk, muttering in French, longing for home. Servants whispered of long nights spent sobbing on the chapel floor. Others claimed they saw her tearing at her hair. Charles, despite his afflictions, adored her. He brought her flowers, gifts, even sweets, though he himself could hardly eat them. He begged her to be happy, but happiness had long become a stranger to her. By age 26, Marie-Louise was wasting away. Her hair thinned, her skin yellowed. She refused to eat more than a few spoonfuls of broth. Doctors bled her, gave her tonics, prayed over her body, but her strength ebbed. One summer morning in 1689, she collapsed. The room filled with priests and physicians. She whispered something in French, too soft to be understood, and then she died. Her death shocked the court. Some blamed poison, others whispered madness, but most knew the truth. Marie-Louise had simply faded away. She was buried in El Escorial, Spain's royal mausoleum. Charles, heartbroken, wept uncontrollably. He would marry again to another foreign princess, but he would never father a child. Marie-Louise's story is not just about a sad marriage or a lonely queen. It's about what happens when a life is sacrificed to a dynasty, when bloodlines take precedence over breath, when a young woman becomes a bridge between kingdoms, nothing more than a means to an end. And yet, in her quiet suffering, she revealed something terrible and true, that purity, when pursued too far, becomes a poison. We leave her there, under the cold stone arches of El Escorial, another lost daughter in a long line of fragile queens. Next, we will step into the German principalities, where another woman, born of close kin and closer secrets, will be thrust into a court darker than any she imagined. But for now, let the silence settle. In the wooded valleys and river-wrapped cities of the Holy Roman Empire, the air carried a different kind of weight. Here, among Gothic spires and half-timbered halls, a young woman named Dorothea of Brandenburg was born into a dynasty carved from alliances and calculation. Her tale, unlike the glittering courts of Versailles or the austere palaces of Spain, unfolded in the quieter, older corners of Europe. Yet it too bore the unmistakable marks of a bloodline folded in on itself. Dorothea came into the world in the early 1430s, a daughter of Frederick I, Elector of Brandenburg, and Elizabeth of Bavaria. Her parents, like so many nobles of the age, were cousins, united more by territory than tenderness. Their marriage, arranged to consolidate land and reinforce old alliances, was politically sound but personally cold. From infancy, Dorothea was expected to reflect the grandeur of her family. She was baptized beneath vaulted ceilings, wrapped in ermine and linen, and placed into the arms of wet nurses who whispered prayers and lullabies over her crib. But even then, there were signs. Her eyes wandered too far to the sides. Her hands, unusually small, often trembled when she grasped for objects. Her teeth, when they arrived, were jagged, unusually brittle. Midwives murmured among themselves. Physicians wrote vague notes in Latin, but the court said nothing. Such imperfections were not to be discussed, especially not in a girl destined for a royal marriage. Dorothea was clever, that much no one could deny. She took easily to her letters, to hymns, to poetry. Her tutors, all monks from the surrounding provinces, remarked on her memory, how she could recite full chapters from the Gospels, how she understood Latin syntax better than most boys. But there was always something ghostly about her intelligence. It was too quiet, too still, like a candle burning in a room with no air. At age 14, Dorothea was married. Her husband was the widowed king of Denmark, Christopher III, a man nearly twice her age. She was sent away by carriage, down through forested passes and across ice-glazed rivers, into a land whose language she did not speak and whose customs she did not yet know. She wept only once, on the night before her departure, when her childhood nurse braided her hair for the final time. In Denmark, the wind never stopped. The court was colder, the people sterner, the rituals even more exhausting than in Brandenburg. Dorothea adapted. She always did. She learned Danish. She memorized the names of every courtier. She wore her crown without letting it slip forward, even though her skull ached from its weight. Christopher III was polite, almost detached. He fulfilled his duties, appeared at feasts, blessed her with formal gestures. But love was absent, and in its place, silence. The court quickly realized that Dorothea would not produce an heir. Months passed, then years. Whispers followed her from corridor to corridor. She had a womb too small, they said. A humoral imbalance. A curse. Others believed it was divine punishment, a flaw in the blood, a punishment for too many generations of cousin marriage. Whatever the cause, Dorothea's belly remained flat, her chambers empty of the sounds of children. Then, unexpectedly, Christopher died. Just a few years into their marriage, he passed away from illness. Dorothea, still in her teens, was left widowed and alone in a foreign court. But fate, ever strange, ever insistent, was not finished with her. She was married again. This time to Christian Wuss, the next king of Denmark. Another political union, hastily arranged. Her dowry remained untouched from the first marriage. She came with influence, and Christian needed that influence. So, once again, Dorothea was draped in bridal white. Once again, she stood before a bishop. Once again, she was given away. And this time, she conceived. The pregnancy shocked everyone, even herself. But the child, born early, pale and struggling, did not survive long. The court tried not to speak of it. She became pregnant again and again. Most of the infants died before their second birthdays. One, a boy named John, survived, but bore a lopsided gait and difficulty with speech. Even when he became king himself, his body betrayed the long shadows cast by his heritage. Dorothea aged quickly. By her 30s, her hair had begun to thin. Her face, once doll-like, grew sharper, more angular. She walked with a slight limp. No one knew why. Her letters became longer, filled with questions about theology, metaphysics, the nature of suffering. Some believed she was losing her mind. Others thought she had simply become too aware of the pattern into which her life had been woven. She took solace in manuscripts. She copied them by hand, illuminating their margins with delicate vines and faded gold. She paid monks to send her texts from distant abbeys. In time, she became more recluse than queen. Her court shrank, her influence waned, her name faded from public memory. When she died, it was during Lent, in a room filled with candles and open psalters. She had been fasting for weeks. Some believed she had starved herself into piety. Others that her body had simply given out after too many years of quiet strain. But her bloodline did not die with her. Through her son John and his own web of marriages, Dorothea's legacy stretched into the royal lines of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Her descendants bore her name for centuries. And with it, they carried the trace of her fragility, the strange echo of one girl's quiet endurance in the face of genetic fate. She was not famous, not beloved by poets, not commemorated in statues or songs, but she was one of many. One more woman twisted into the great glimmering thread of royal Europe, silken on the surface but fraying beneath. Next, we will cross into Italy, where a girl named Joanna would become both a duchess and a warning. A beauty whose blood betrayed her even more than the men who surrounded her. But that is for another night. Let your thoughts drift now, like leaves on a northern river. Let the stillness settle. In the heart of Renaissance Italy, where marble palaces rose above narrow streets and the scent of oranges mixed with incense from ancient chapels, another name quietly bloomed, Joanna of Austria, Grand Duchess of Tuscany. Born of imperial glory and raised among relics and relics of saints, her story would shimmer with the illusion of elegance, even as it unraveled thread by thread, revealing the same tangled lineage that had cursed so many women before her. Joanna was born in 1547 in Prague, a jewel of the Habsburg crown. Her father was Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. Her mother, Anne of Bohemia and Hungary, was also a Habsburg. They were cousins, naturally. And though the court whispered blessings at her birth, some among the midwives exchanged silent glances. Joanna's body was stiff, her limbs unusually rigid. Her cries were thin and prolonged. But no one dared speak of flaws when imperial blood flowed through a child. Her early years were shaped by confinement, not cruelty, but discipline so rigid it might as well have been. She was taught to sit still for hours, hands folded perfectly, voice lowered to a breath. Tutors corrected her posture with sharp taps. When she failed to remember a saint's day or a Latin conjugation, she was made to kneel for hours on cold stone. Even her dolls were posed upright, as if slouching might summon sin. Yet Joanna never protested. She was soft-spoken, docile, and obedient. everything a princess should be. Her letters, written in ornate cursive, always ended with invocations to God's mercy, and perhaps she believed in that mercy, even as her body ached in ways no one ever understood. Her joints often seized, her hands cramped painfully after too much embroidery. She fainted easily in the summer heat. At 16, she was told she would marry Francesco de' Medici, heir to the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. The Medici were not strangers to political marriages, and though Francesco was not of royal birth, his family had amassed enough power, wealth, and cultural prestige to merit such an alliance. The Habsburgs saw in him a tool. Francesco saw in Joanna a transaction. She was sent to Florence in full ceremony, accompanied by bishops, noblewomen, and priests. The journey was long and ceremonial, but upon arrival, Joanna's illusion of peace began to falter. Tuscany was different, hotter, louder, unbound by the solemn rituals of her youth. The Medici court was opulent and theatrical. Francesco himself was reserved, brooding, but obsessed with art, science, and alchemy. Joanna's strict piety confused him. Their wedding was splendid, the feasts endless. But behind the brocaded curtains of their chambers, coldness took root. Francesco barely touched her. When he did, it was with duty, not desire. He already had a mistress, Bianca Capello, a Venetian woman of sensual charm and cunning mind. The court adored Bianca. She danced, she laughed. She hosted salons where artists and thinkers argued late into the night. Joanna, in contrast, remained alone, quiet, pregnant. Her first child was stillborn, her second a sickly girl who died before her baptism. The third, another girl, survived, but never walked properly. The fourth, a boy, died within weeks. By the time she was 23, Joanna had suffered 5 childbirths. Only one child, Eleanor, remained healthy enough to play in the palace gardens. Her body weakened with each passing year. She walked with a limp that grew more pronounced. Her hands shook during Mass. Her face, once delicate, became sunken and severe. Doctors bled her. Priests prayed over her. Francesco sent her tinctures from his laboratories, distillations of mercury, ground pearls, powdered bone. She drank them all. Nothing helped. Joanna found solace in confession, but even her confessor seemed uneasy. She had begun to hear things, whispers in empty rooms, the soft creak of footsteps behind closed doors. Once she was found in the chapel, weeping before a crucifix, convinced the Christ had blinked at her. Francesco, for his part, spent more and more time with Bianca. He stopped attending court functions with Joanna. He refused to sit beside her at Mass. When rumors spread that Bianca was pregnant, Joanna locked herself in her room for 3 days. Then came the night of the accident. It was in April of 1578. Joanna, now 31, heavily pregnant again, was descending the narrow stairs of the Palazzo Pitti. She slipped. Some said she fell. Others whispered that she was pushed. No one truly knew. She was found crumpled on the floor, blood pooling beneath her. Her unborn child was already dead. She survived the fall for 2 days, moaning softly before succumbing to internal bleeding. Francesco did not wait long. He married Bianca the same year. The court celebrated. Few mourned Joanna. And yet, in Florence, there remains a silence in her former rooms. A portrait of her still hangs in one hallway, eyes hollow, mouth tight, framed by an austere veil. Some say you can still hear soft weeping near the chapel stairs. Joanna of Austria, a woman folded into the weight of her name, bearing children she could not keep, loving a man who never looked at her face. Her bones lay now beneath Tuscan soil, but her blood lives on, in paintings, in archives, in the quiet deformities of descendants born from the same narrowed pool. She was one more link in the golden chain of dynastic preservation, one more offering to the altar of empire. In our next story, we move north to a queen who ruled Poland but never her own heart, a woman who was crowned then cast aside, one who left behind not heirs but only questions. Until then, rest your thoughts. Let them drift like candle smoke on cathedral air. The winds over Krakow sweep wide across the Vistula River, carrying with them the scent of old stone, wet pine, and secrets long buried in royal crypts. In the late 17th century, Poland, vast, fractured, and ruled by elective monarchy, welcomed a foreign queen whose ancestry glittered with imperial gold, but whose body bore the invisible signatures of too much shared blood. Her name was Eleanor of Austria, and though she would wear a crown, she would remain a prisoner to the very line that gave her power. Eleanor was born in 1653, the daughter of Emperor Ferdinand III and Maria Ana of Spain. This was not merely a cross-national union, it was another binding of Habsburg to Habsburg. Her father and mother were first cousins. Their marriage had been orchestrated with care, and their children were precious not for who they were, but for how they carried the torch of purity, at least in the dynastic sense. But purity, as ever, came with a cost. Eleanor's childhood was one of structure and seclusion. She grew up in the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, a cold maze of marble and creaking wood. Her lessons were endless: Latin, music, philosophy, needlework, and above all, Catholic doctrine. Her world was orderly but narrow. She saw few other children and fewer still of her own age. Her siblings were fragile, many dying young. She survived, but with a constitution that was often called delicate. She was prone to nosebleeds. Her fingers trembled when she held a pen too long. Her eyesight faded early, yet no one spoke of her health aloud. Instead, they praised her elegance, her piety, her docility, traits fit for marriage. When Eleanor was 22, unusually old by royal standards, she was offered as bride to King Mikhail I of Poland. The Polish throne was different from the others of Europe. It was elected, not inherited. And Mikhail Korobut-Vishniowiecki was a choice born of compromise, noble, well-meaning, but lacking in power and charm. His selection as king had come after turbulent years, and he needed legitimacy. Eleanor, with her impeccable bloodline, offered just that. She left Vienna in spring, through muddy roads and windswept forests. The journey took weeks. When she arrived in Poland, the welcome was formal but restrained. The nobles were wary of Habsburg influence. The people, proud and fiercely independent, viewed the foreign queen with suspicion. The wedding took place in Krakow's Wawel Cathedral, under high Gothic arches and flickering candlelight. Eleanor wore white trimmed with Austrian silver. Mikhail was pale, unremarkable, already showing signs of illness. The mass was long, the court tense. The crown was placed upon her head as choirs chanted in Latin, but it may as well have been forged from iron. Married life offered little reprieve. Mikhail was kind, but often bedridden. He suffered from seizures and prolonged fevers. His moods turned suddenly. He would weep without warning, then retreat into prayer. Eleanor, true to her nature, remained serene. She prayed with him, cared for him, and fulfilled her role with quiet precision. But she was deeply, achingly alone. Her polish was poor. Her letters home became longer and sadder. "They do not see me," she wrote once, "only the crown upon my hair." She tried to charm the court, holding small concerts and inviting noblewomen to her chambers, but few came. Rumors swirled that she was too pious, too foreign, too barren. She bore no children. The fault, almost certainly, was not hers. Mikhail's health deteriorated quickly, and his body could barely endure the weight of robes, let alone father a dynasty. But in the eyes of the court, a queen without an heir was a queen without work. She fasted more, prayed harder. Her hair began to thin. Her face turned gaunt. In 1673, after just 4 years of marriage, King Mikhail died suddenly of a stroke. Eleanor, not even 30, was widowed. The Polish throne was once again open to election, and Eleanor for a brief moment considered staying, perhaps remarrying a Polish noble, perhaps even influencing the vote. But the nobles had no desire for Habsburg permanence. They elected a French prince instead, and Eleanor was quietly dismissed. She returned to Austria, not as a queen, but as a burden. Vienna had changed. Her brothers now ruled. Her place at court was ceremonial at best. She spent her days in convents and chapels donating to nuns, sponsoring liturgical music, and living in half-lighted rooms. Her letters became even more distant, full of theological questions and poetic longing. She once wrote, "In the silence of prayer, I remember the bells of Krakow." She never remarried, never sought power. Her life faded slowly, like ink on parchment left in the sun. When she died in 1697, she was buried in the Capuchin crypt in Vienna, among rows of other Habsburg bones. Her coffin, smaller than most, bore a simple inscription: Eleonora Regina Polonia, Eleanor, Queen of Poland. But her story was more than a title. She was a woman born of too much ambition and too little love. A vessel for politics, a stranger in every home she knew. The blood in her veins had once belonged to empires, but it flowed through a heart that longed only for peace. And so we close the chapter on Eleanor, a queen whose reign was little more than shadow, but whose quiet sorrow tells us everything about the cost of being born to rule. Next, We will meet a woman whose name was erased, rewritten, and repurposed. An archduchess whose fate was sealed not by what she did, but by what her family could no longer undo. Let your breath soften now. Let the candles burn low. Let the silence once again wrap itself around your thoughts. Her name was Margaret Theresa of Austria, or rather that was the name given to her in portraits, framed in gilt, glowing with rich velvets and pearl-studded gowns. But the real Margaret, the one hidden behind layers of satin and ceremonial bows, was a quiet soul locked inside a fragile, shrinking world. Born into the Habsburg dynasty at its most brittle, she was not merely a daughter of power. She was a reflection of it, a mirror polished until it cracked. She entered the world in 1651, born in Madrid to King Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria. Already, the name Austria should strike a chord, for Mariana was not just queen, she was also Philip's niece. Their marriage had been arranged to keep power within the family, to keep foreign hands away from the Spanish crown. And so Margaret came into existence not as the product of love, but of calculation. She was the daughter of uncle and niece, heir to 1,000 years of compacted bloodlines. As an infant, she was striking, round-cheeked, bright-eyed, with golden curls so fair they looked spun from candlelight. The court cooed over her beauty. Painters adored her. Diego Velázquez, the royal court painter, captured her likeness in one of the most famous portraits of the Spanish Golden Age, Las Meninas. She stands there, 5 years old, in a stiff brocade dress, surrounded by maids and dwarfs in sunlight. But if one looks closely, the expression is not joy. It is confusion. A polite bewilderment, as though she knows the stage is hers, but doesn't understand the play. Margaret was raised not by her mother, but by an army of attendants. Every movement was choreographed. She was forbidden to run, to sweat, to cry in public. When she had stomach pains, a frequent complaint, they were soothed not with comfort, but with prayers and bitter remedies. Her bones were delicate, her appetite inconsistent. She was told she must be strong, for Spain, for God, for the House of Habsburg. By the time she was 10, discussions of marriage had already begun. There was only one serious candidate, Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor. He was her maternal uncle and her first cousin, and like Margaret, he bore the pale skin and distinctive underbite of the Habsburg lineage. The match was seen as ideal, politically clean, genetically predictable. The plan had always been in place. Philip IV had promised her hand the day she was born. She was 15 when the marriage was finalized. Before leaving Spain, she wept, not loudly, not with protest, but her confessor later wrote that she sat in her bedchamber for 2 days, staring at the wall, murmuring Latin verses over and over. She asked if a person could be holy without being happy, he noted. Her journey from Spain to Vienna was long and ceremonial. Along the way, she was greeted by nobles, paraded through cities, watched with both admiration and unease. Everyone saw the face from the paintings, but no one saw the girl beneath. In Vienna, the wedding was grand. Gold draped the altars, choirs sang, but behind the veil of opulence was a quietly tragic union. Leopold, though intelligent and devout, was awkward. He adored Margaret, but not with the intimacy of a lover, more like a collector cherishing a rare object. Margaret, ever obedient, smiled and fulfilled her duties. She attended court, gave alms, played the harpsichord, and above all, she worked to produce an heir. Her first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. The second brought a child, a baby girl named Maria Antonia. But Margaret's body suffered terribly. Her spine ached, her gums bled. She fainted often. Physicians hovered over her like vultures, prescribing bleeding, purging, herbs soaked in wine. Nothing helped. Still, she conceived again and again. In her short life, she endured 6 pregnancies. Only 1 child survived infancy. Each pregnancy left her weaker than before. By 20, she walked with a limp. Her skin turned sallow. Her once bright eyes sank into hollows. Letters from her attendants described long nights of trembling, fits of crying, and mysterious fevers that came and went with no warning. And yet, she was still expected to appear in public, to smile, to host, to sing. She did all of it. In her private moments, Margaret wrote letters to her family in Spain. They were dutiful, never accusatory, but one line stands out. "I feel myself melting," she wrote, "as if I am made of wax and the candle is too near." She died in 1673. She was just 21. The cause of death was officially listed as exhaustion and complications from childbirth. But in truth, Her body had been unraveling for years. The tight loop of her DNA, coiled too many times around itself, had left her vulnerable from the start. She had been raised like porcelain, and like porcelain, she had shattered. Her daughter, Maria Antonia, would continue the line, marrying two within the family, and through her would come more Habsburg heirs, including one whose jaw would hang slack, whose tongue would fill his mouth like a stone, whose spine would curve until he could barely stand. But that is another story. Margaret Theresa of Austria remains in many ways the symbol of a dynasty's final elegance before its fall. Beautiful in portrait, tragic in truth. A girl with a crown too heavy, a body too fragile, and a fate too tightly bound. Next, we'll turn to the north once more, to Scandinavia, where a princess with equally tangled lineage would fight her way through ice and fire, only to discover that blood, no matter how noble, could never shield her from sorrow. Until then, let the night deepen around you. Let stillness settle across your thoughts, like snow upon the rooftops of Vienna. In the distant, frost-laced reaches of the Scandinavian north, where the winters hang heavy and the sky glows silver at dawn, there lived a princess forged of ancient bloodlines, tangled loyalties, and the quiet desperation of duty. Her name was Ulrika Eleonora of Denmark, and while her life would end beneath the golden spires of Stockholm, her beginnings were rooted in a Danish court filled with silken facades and shivering truths. She was born in 1656, the daughter of King Frederick III of Denmark and Sophie Amalie of Brunswick-Lüneburg. Her family tree stretched back through generations of nobility, Danish, German, and deeply interwoven. Marriages between cousins had long been the norm. Second cousins, first cousins, even uncles to nieces. The lines were tight, the branches gnarled. And from this dense, insular root system, Ulrika Eleonora bloomed, a pale, delicate flower touched from the start by the chill of fragile blood. She was not the eldest daughter, nor the most politically significant, at least not at first. But she carried something that others at court quickly noticed, a softness, a humility, a stillness that seemed to calm even the most chaotic moments. From a young age, she preferred chapel prayers to court games, embroidery to grand feasts. Her voice was low and soothing, her gestures measured. There was an air of fragility to her, one not merely imagined. She was prone to illness. Her lungs were weak, her skin unusually pale, nearly translucent in the candlelight. She rarely played outdoors, for even the soft spring winds could bring coughing fits that lasted for days. Yet she never complained. Her mother, a stern woman of German orderliness, believed in discipline. Pain is the gift of queens, she would say, and Ulrika listened. When she was 12, a physician warned that her bone structure seemed unusually narrow. Her hands were small and twisted inward when cold. He recommended less embroidery and more movement. But her tutors insisted she remain seated through her hours of lessons. Latin, court etiquette, psalms, genealogy, and above all, silence. By the time she reached 15, marriage proposals had begun to appear. It was Charles the Left of Sweden who ultimately won her hand, not through courtship, but through treaty. Sweden and Denmark had long been rivals, and a marriage between Ulrika and the young Swedish king would help settle tensions. Her brother, King Christian V of Denmark, agreed. Ulrika, as always, did not resist. She crossed the Øresund Strait in silence, her barge gliding through ice-crusted waters, her carriage packed with letters and rosaries, not laughter. The Danish court wept as she left. She did not. Upon arrival in Stockholm, Ulrika was greeted with suspicion. The Swedish people viewed her as a foreigner, a daughter of their enemies. The court, cold and militaristic under Charles VI's stern leadership, found her too meek, too delicate, too devout. She tried to learn Swedish quickly. She wrote polite letters to nobles. She gave gifts to the Queen Dowager. Still, the air around her remained frigid. Charles II, young and brimming with the weight of kingship, had expected more. A queen who could command attention. A wife who could produce sons without effort. A partner who could meet him not just in marriage, but in presence. Ulrika, thin and coughing behind embroidered veils, was not that woman. Still, she tried. In her first year of marriage, she gave birth to a daughter, who died after 1 week. The loss silenced the court for a day. Then it moved on. She didn't. She retreated further into prayer, sometimes spending whole nights kneeling on cold stone. Her ladies reported that she began whispering the names of saints in her sleep. Another child came. A boy, Charles, frail, listless, and barely alive, but he lived, and Ulrika poured herself into his care. Her husband, softened by grief, grew kinder for a time. He allowed her more freedom to write letters back home. He sat beside her at chapel, but even then he remained emotionally distant, more commander than companion. Ulrika's health continued to fail. She grew thinner. Her fingers curled inward, a condition never fully understood. Her lungs often rattled with each breath. The doctors, unsure of what to name her illness, simply referred to her constitution as inherited delicacy. The court said little. Everyone, it seemed, was used to queens who withered, and yet she endured. Even as her body broke, Ulrika became a quiet force for charity. She funded orphanages. She personally embroidered altar cloths for village churches. She insisted on visiting the sick in the poorer districts of Stockholm, even when it left her bedbound for days afterward. The people began to love her, not for power, but for presence. Her gentleness became something holy. In 1693, after 20 years of marriage, Ulrika died at the age of 36. She passed in her sleep, her final breath quiet and unobtrusive, like a curtain falling at the end of a play no one truly watched. Her husband wept, the people mourned, and her son, Charles II, would go on to become one of Sweden's most famous kings, a military genius, bold and unrelenting. But even he would later say, "My mother taught me more with her silence than others did with shouts." Ulrika Eleonora of Denmark was buried in Ridderholmen Church, beneath vaulted ceilings and beneath the weight of centuries of dynastic ambition. Her tombstone is modest, but her memory lingers, especially in winter, when the wind off the water carries something softer, something aching. Another life given for peace. Another body strained by centuries of closed loops in noble veins. Next we turn to the east, where a duchess born in the cold halls of Russia will find herself imprisoned not by walls, but by the expectations carried in her blood. And until then, let the frost settle gently, and let your breath follow the quiet rhythm of fading footsteps on snow. In the frozen expanse of Imperial Russia, where palaces loomed like stone giants and silence clung to the air like frost, a girl named Anna Petrovna was born beneath chandeliers and snowstorms. Her birth was wrapped in layers of contradiction, lavish and secretive, hopeful yet cursed. She was not expected, and when she came, she brought with her a bloodline both revered and quietly feared. Anna was born in 1708, the illegitimate, then hastily legitimized daughter of Peter the Great and his mistress, later wife Catherine I. Her mother was of humble origin, perhaps a servant or a laundress, plucked from obscurity into the blinding orbit of an emperor. Her father, Peter, was Titan and terror combined, towering in stature, unpredictable in mood, determined to drag Russia into the modern world, no matter the cost. Anna's early life was cloaked in ceremony. Peter, ever aware of appearances, had her declared a legitimate princess and gave her a French governess, a German tutor, and a court to echo the grandeur of Versailles. But for all the brocade and silverware, Anna remained a child born of necessity, not love. Her father was rarely home. Her mother, often sick or silenced, kept to her chambers. The little girl with ash blonde hair and dark, watchful eyes wandered palace corridors in silence, learning early how to observe without being seen. She was clever, undoubtedly. She spoke French by 8, German by 10, and understood court politics before her first bleeding. But there was something else, an air of fragility, of precocious exhaustion. She was often pale, her hands always cold. One court physician wrote that her eyes held the expression of a woman twice her age, as though she dreamed while awake. She didn't laugh easily. She didn't play much either. By the time Anna turned 15, the Russian court had transformed. Her father, mad with reform, had torn down old customs, reshaped the army, built a new capital from a swamp, and crushed opposition with fire and steel. And still he looked at his daughter with disappointment. She was not strong, not loud, not iron-willed. She was, in his words, too much her mother. But she was still useful. At 16, Anna was betrothed to Charles Frederick, Duke of Holstein-Gottorp. He was a relative of the Swedish royal family, her father's old enemies, and their marriage was seen as both an insult and an olive branch. Charles was awkward, arrogant, and chronically ill. He coughed blood in winter and drank too much in summer, but he was of noble blood, and Peter approved. The wedding took place in St. Petersburg, with fireworks bursting above the Neva River while Anna stood silently in layers of gold lace, her face unreadable. They departed for Kiel soon after. Life in Holstein was colder than Russia, not in climate, but in affection. The court there was small and deeply Germanic, rigid in etiquette, frigid in mood. Anna, a Russian princess with foreign manners, was never fully accepted. Her husband rarely spoke to her outside of public appearances. He locked himself in studies with diplomats and scholars, chasing grand schemes he had no means to execute. She was left alone. Still, she wrote letters, long, introspective letters to her sister Elizabeth, to old tutors, to the few friends she had made in childhood. They speak of melancholy, of endless gray skies, of aching limbs, and above all, of loneliness. Her body began to betray her more openly. She complained of pain in her joints, headaches that lasted for days, a constant chill she could never shake. She was 20 when her first child was conceived. Pregnancy did not suit her. Her body, thin and hunched, suffered under the strain. She vomited blood, her skin yellowed, her feet swelled grotesquely, and yet she endured it in silence, determined to give birth to something that mattered, something that could not be taken from her. In early 1728, she gave birth to a son, Peter, but she never recovered. Within weeks, Anna's condition worsened. Some said it was tuberculosis, others an infection from childbirth. There were even whispers of poison, quiet murmurs that Charles sought her death to remarry into better fortune. The truth remains lost in the folds of time. What is known is this: she died before her 21st birthday, quietly, alone, in a foreign land. Her body was embalmed and returned to Russia. She was buried with honors as a Grand Duchess and daughter of Peter the Great. But her presence faded quickly. Her name lived on only in her son, Peter of Holstein-Gottorp, who would one day become Peter III of Russia. Through him, her blood would pass into Catherine the Great's lineage and into generations of Romanovs. But Anna herself remains a ghost in the Russian record, a girl born of revolution, married into coldness, and devoured by a body too frail to carry the burdens placed upon it. A fleeting pale flame in a dynasty that demanded steel. She died young, but her legacy endured, etched not in triumph but in genetic inheritance, passed down like a whispered warning. And now we leave her, watching the northern sky from her marble tomb, her story soft as snowfall, sharp as ice. Next, we'll move west again, into the heart of the Habsburg Empire once more, where another daughter born into grandeur would descend not into tragedy, but into something even more elusive: madness. Let the snow settle. Let the silence take hold. Let us dream, one more time, beneath the dim glow of forgotten crowns. She was born under the shadow of vast ceilings, in halls echoing with power and echoes of whispered worry. Her name was Maria Anna of Austria, and her cradle was not just carved of imperial oak, but of inherited expectation and genetic weight. Born in 1683 to Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor, and Eleanor Magdalene of Neuburg, Maria Anna arrived into a world gilded with ceremony and silently steeped in the consequences of centuries of inbreeding. Her parents were first cousins. Her grandparents had also been cousins. The pattern stretched backward like an embroidered tapestry, stitched only with the same thread. Even as a newborn, Maria Anna's eyes bore the signature wide-set softness so often found in Habsburg portraits, and her lower lip, the infamous Habsburg jaw, already promised to thicken into its inevitable shape. Yet despite these signs, the child was celebrated. She was Leopold's favorite daughter, though he showed it more with directives than affection. Her mother, deeply pious, raised her daughters to be vessels of obedience, not instruments of emotion. They were to be holy first and women second. Maria Anna excelled at this. From a very early age, she was quiet, thoughtful, and devout, remarkably so. She fasted, even as a child. She requested Mass twice daily by age 10. Her letters from this period are lucid and filled with theological questions, some too mature for her age, some too dark. In one, she writes, "What if God creates souls only to test how long they can endure without breaking?" Her tutors praised her intellect, though they quietly worried over her health. She was thin, her appetite light, her skin nearly translucent. Her hands trembled during writing. One physician noted that her heart sometimes skipped beats, that her lungs wheezed when she walked more than a few steps quickly. But the imperial court dismissed it all as nerves or sanctity. By 17, Maria Anna had become the picture of an ideal Habsburg bride, well-educated, fluent in multiple languages, gentle, and above all, pure. She had refused several minor marriage proposals. Her family had higher plans. Eventually, she was offered to John V of Portugal, a young king, Catholic, in need of a wife to secure the fragile alliance between Lisbon and Vienna. The match was deemed perfect. There was just one complication. They were cousins once again. Neither side objected. The bloodlines were already so entangled that one more loop seemed hardly worth comment. The wedding was arranged with the usual splendor. Maria Anna, then 26, made the long journey by carriage, river barge, and sea to Portugal, accompanied by a dowry of unimaginable wealth and a heart still wrapped in the silence of her upbringing. Lisbon was different, brighter, more fragrant, less rigid. But it did not warm her. Her new husband was polite, dutiful, but disinterested. He was often away hunting or in council. When he did visit her chambers, it was with formality, not longing. Maria Anna tried to please him. She smiled when spoken to. She offered to read to him from St. Augustine, but her presence was always met with a gentle but unmistakable distance. She was, after all, not there to be loved. She was there to birth. Her first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. The second, a daughter, died within the week. The third, a son, survived. He was named Joseph. The court celebrated. Maria Anna wept privately in her oratory, her hands shaking so violently she could not hold the rosary. By the time she reached her mid-30s, the strain began to show. Her jaw had become noticeably misaligned. Her voice slurred slightly from the pressure it put on her tongue. Her spine curved inward. She walked with effort. And worst of all, her mind began to splinter. At first, it was small things. She would forget dates. She would lose track of her location in the palace. She began muttering prayers under her breath, even in the middle of conversations. Then came the night terrors. Screams heard down the stone halls, followed by long, unsettling silences. Physicians were called. They prescribed mercury, fasting, leeches. Nothing helped. Her episodes became more frequent. Once, she accused a lady-in-waiting of being the devil in disguise. Another time, she insisted she was already dead and that the court was simply entertaining her ghost. Her husband, embarrassed and overwhelmed, began to spend even less time with her. She was moved into more private quarters, away from the main rooms of the palace. The court spoke of her delicately. The queen is praying, they said. She prefers solitude. In truth, Maria Anna was deteriorating, her body succumbing to inherited frailty, her mind unraveling thread by thread. Still, she remained devout. She attended Mass daily, even when she could no longer walk unaided. She insisted on making confessions, though her thoughts often spiraled into incoherence. One priest later wrote, "Her soul is like a broken mirror, still reflecting the light of heaven, but in 1,000 scattered pieces." She died in 1754 at the age of 71, a long life by royal standards, but one spent more in isolation than celebration. After her death, she was buried in Lisbon with all honors due a queen. But her story faded quickly. She had done what was asked. She had borne an heir. She had prayed. She had never rebelled. And in the end, she had broken. Maria Anna's life was not marked by drama or scandal, but by slow, quiet collapse. She is not remembered for her politics or her beauty, but for her silence. And perhaps that is most telling, for silence is often the heaviest legacy of those born into bloodlines too tightly wound. And now we turn to another chapter, to a woman whose life teetered between myth and history, madness and manipulation. A woman who would become the empress of an empire so vast, even her mind could not contain it. But that is for another night. Let your eyes close now and let the candle burn just a little lower. The echoes of Maria Anna's prayers still linger, soft as dust, on palace stone. She arrived into the world under strange stars, an empress before she could speak, a shadowed figure long before she wore a crown. Her name was Elizabeth of Russia. Born in 1709, she was the daughter of Peter the Great and Catherine I, a union forged not just in love, but in ambition, upheaval, and legacy. Elizabeth's birth was whispered through the marble halls of the Kremlin with a mixture of hope and hesitation. On paper, she had everything: a father who had carved an empire from wilderness and superstition, and a mother whose rise from servant to empress defied every law of courtly hierarchy. But blood, always blood, wrote its own rules. Though Elizabeth was technically not born of marriage, Peter later legitimized his children with Catherine. It changed their status in law, but not entirely in mind. To the Russian aristocracy, she was always slightly set apart. Not impure, not unfit, but other. Too much like her mother, they said. Too much softness in the jaw. Too much warmth in the skin. Yet she dazzled. Even as a child, Elizabeth drew attention wherever she walked. Her hair was golden, her eyes sea glass green, her complexion radiant. Her nurses dressed her in silks even when she slept. Courtiers gasped at her beauty. Foreign envoys wrote home about her otherworldly grace. She had the charm her father lacked, the vitality her mother could never muster. And behind that beauty was a mind sharper than most expected. She listened more than she spoke. She learned French, German, and Italian. She memorized entire operas after a single performance. She had a gift for mimicry, could imitate the voices of her tutors and the gestures of ministers so precisely that even Peter laughed. But not all was light. Even in youth, Elizabeth was prone to fainting spells. Her hands often trembled. Her appetite would vanish for days. And sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, she would retreat to corners of the palace to sit alone, knees drawn to chest, humming lullabies no one remembered teaching her. After Peter's death in 1725, the Russian court fractured into factions and chaos. Elizabeth was sidelined, her position ambiguous, her future uncertain. She had no title of power. Her mother, Catherine I, ruled briefly before her own death. Then came a parade of emperors and empresses, some legitimate, others propped up by foreign armies and internal scheming. Elizabeth watched them all and waited. Her beauty remained, but it began to distort. As she entered her 20s, her body thickened. Her moods grew mercurial. One day she would be the belle of the ballroom, dancing until sunrise. The next she would not leave her chamber for weeks. She suffered intense migraines. Sleep eluded her. She began to obsess over small things, fabrics, numbers, rituals. She refused to wear black. She feared mirrors in the dark. She never married. Though countless proposals came, foreign princes, Russian nobles, even French dukes, none took hold. Elizabeth resisted each one. Some believed she still grieved a lover from her youth, a nobleman who died under suspicious circumstances. Others whispered that her father's blood made her too wild, too unpredictable. She belonged to no one, not even herself. Then in 1741, Elizabeth staged a coup. With the support of the Guards Regiment, many of whom still revered her as Peter's daughter, she stormed the Winter Palace, deposed the infant Emperor Ivan VI, and declared herself Empress of Russia. The court barely resisted. The people cheered. At last, a Romanov ruled again. Her early reign was marked by brilliance. She outlawed torture. She built hospitals and universities. She funded the arts like no monarch before her. She brought French ballet to the Russian stage. She reduced noble taxes. She strengthened the military. For a time, Russia gleamed. But behind the thrones and victories, something within her frayed. She became obsessed with death, terrified of it, yet unable to stop talking about it. She changed clothes multiple times a day, unable to tolerate the feeling of one fabric too long. She banned funerals in her presence. She refused to sign death warrants, even for traitors, not out of mercy, but fear. Her attendants began to walk on tiptoe. Her moods could change mid-breath. She had fits of weeping that lasted for hours. Sometimes, in the middle of state meetings, she would stare into space, as though watching something no one else could see. Other times, she would wake her attendants in the middle of the night, demanding candles be lit in every room to chase away the dark. As she aged, her health collapsed inwards. Her legs swelled, her heart raced, her speech slurred during moments of stress. Her jaw, thickened slightly by Habsburg blood, made chewing difficult. Yet she hid much behind rouge and pearls. By the 1750s, Elizabeth rarely appeared in public without layers of makeup and towering wigs. She insisted on youth, on color, on performance. She kept a wardrobe of over 15,000 gowns. And still, she could not hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She died on Christmas Day, 1761. Her final hours were filled with prayers and disjointed monologues, half in Russian, half in French. She held the hand of a priest and murmured about fire, angels, and her father's voice calling her through the snow. Her reign lasted 20 years. She left no children, only shadows. But her name remained etched into Russian memory, not just for her reforms or her beauty, but for the strange duality she embodied. Elizabeth of Russia, a woman of extraordinary strength, haunted by invisible fractures, the daughter of a titan, yet forever at the edge of breaking. And now we let her rest. Our next chapter will take us to the heart of Burgundy, where a girl born to wealth and lineage would vanish into the folds of family decay, her story nearly lost, save for the whispers of what she might have become. Until then, let the cold winds of St. Petersburg pass softly, and let your thoughts return to stillness. In the twilight fields of Burgundy, where the vineyards twist like old secrets and castles sleep beneath moss and ivy, a child was born into a world that was already slipping through time. Her name was Marie de Bourgogne, Mary of Burgundy. And though she would become one of the richest heiresses in Europe, her story is a study in fragility, isolation, and the quiet price of being born into a bloodline that had folded itself too tightly for too long. She came into the world in 1457 in the palace at Brussels, a city then cloaked in the gold and steel of the Burgundian court. Her father, Charles the Bold, was Duke of Burgundy, a man renowned for his ambition, his fiery temper, and his dreams of building an empire that would rival even France or the Holy Roman Empire. Her mother, Isabella of Bourbon, was his cousin, and though their marriage was cordial, it had been arranged as so many were, to bind blood, land, and legacy. From birth, Marie was watched closely. Her mother, already in poor health, faded from the world while Marie was still a toddler. Isabella died young, of what they called consumption, her body weakened by childbirth, her lungs failing quietly in a chamber hung with tapestries and silence. Marie would barely remember her. With no mother and no siblings, Marie grew up alone in a court defined by ceremony and spectacle. She was surrounded by courtiers, artists, and diplomats, yet profoundly isolated. Her father adored her, but as a possession, as the key to his dynasty's future. She was not a daughter in the traditional sense. She was a symbol, and symbols are not allowed to bend. She was beautiful, they said. Tall, with chestnut hair and a quiet gravity in her gaze. She rode horses with unusual skill, and she read Latin by age 9. But her tutors noted that she tired quickly, that her hands cramped during writing, that she sometimes trembled when reciting long passages aloud. Her health was delicate. Her blood, already touched by the legacy of too many intermarriages, seemed thinner than most. Still, Charles the Bold paraded her through court with pride. At feasts she sat beside him, crowned in sapphires. At diplomatic meetings she stood silent but visible, a reminder of what her dowry represented, the entire Burgundian inheritance, a wealth of land stretching from modern-day France to the Netherlands. Suitors came like waves. The kings of France and England sent envoys. The Habsburgs proposed alliances, but Charles delayed, always believing he had time, always chasing larger ambitions. He took his daughter with him on military campaigns, dressing her in armor to ride at the front of parades. Yet even then, she was kept apart, too valuable to risk. Her body was already no longer her own. Then, everything changed. In 1477, Charles the Bold died at the Battle of Nancy, his body left frozen in the snow, unrecognizable. Burgundy, now leaderless, was thrown into chaos. France invaded, the nobility panicked, and 17-year-old Marie, barely more than a girl, was thrust onto the throne. She became Duchess of Burgundy in name, but in truth, she was a hunted treasure. The French king, Louis XI, demanded her hand in marriage. If she agreed, Burgundy would be annexed peacefully. If she refused, war would continue. Her advisors were divided. The court splintered into factions. Marie, caught between her father's legacy and her own survival, made a fateful decision. She chose Maximilian of Austria, son of Emperor Frederick III, a Habsburg. It was a bold, dangerous move, a gamble that Burgundy could stay independent by tying itself to the Holy Roman Empire instead of France. The marriage was hastily arranged. Maximilian arrived in Ghent with a modest entourage, unpolished but sincere. And for a brief moment, there was light. The two found common ground. They laughed, rode horses together, shared poetry. Some even whispered they had fallen in love. But time was unkind. Marie, now burdened with rule, pregnancy, and a body that had never been strong, began to fade. Her first child, Philip, was born in 1478, healthy, but the labor left her shaken. She continued her political duties, riding between cities, negotiating with nobles, fighting to keep her inheritance intact. She exhausted herself in the process. Then in 1482, while out riding a horse, something she had done since childhood, Marie fell. The horse stumbled. She was thrown. Her spine cracked and her lungs were punctured. She lingered for several days in excruciating pain, her breathing shallow, her voice barely audible. She begged for her children. She asked for Maximilian. She asked, too, for her father. She died at just 25. Her funeral was immense. Black banners stretched across towns, bells tolled in every city she had ruled. But her death marked the true end of Burgundy as an independent power. Her son, Philip, would become the father of Charles V, the great Habsburg emperor. Through her, the Burgundian inheritance merged into the Habsburg dynasty, and with it, the legacy of intertwined bloodlines deepened even further. Marie's story might seem like one of triumph, a duchess who ruled, who loved, who resisted. But beneath that surface lies a quieter truth. Her life was never truly her own. She was born into a destiny mapped out before she could speak, and when she tried to hold on to it, it shattered her. She remains, even now, a ghost on the edge of European history. Not quite a queen, not quite forgotten. Next, we follow her blood forward, into Spain once more, where a descendant would rise to power with trembling hands and a mind so fractured, it seemed the family line had finally reached its breaking point. But until then, let us rest again. Let the vineyards sleep beneath the fog, and let the candle burn low, one golden flicker for the girl who rode too far, too fast. She was born into silence. Not the gentle hush of nightfall or prayer, but the kind of silence that lingers in darkened corridors, where secrets pulse like a second heartbeat. Her name was Maria Ana of Spain, born in 1606, and by the time her eyes first opened in the Royal Alcazar of Madrid, her fate had already begun to fold inward. She was the daughter of Philip III of Spain and Margaret of Austria, herself the niece of the man she married. A loop in the Habsburg chain, yet another instance of blood bending back toward itself. Maria Ana was a child of that quiet recursion, the product of generations of cousin to cousin, uncle to niece entwinement. And though she arrived healthy in body, the legacy of that lineage crept behind her like a shadow. From infancy, she was wrapped in protocol, held not as a daughter, but as a relic. Her nurses were instructed never to address her without ceremony. Her toys were gilded, her cradles carved with gold leaf prayers. But beneath the luxury was a girl who coughed too often, whose skin bruised too easily, and who sometimes stared just a little too long at nothing at all. She had her mother's pale complexion, her father's thin frame, and the unmistakable Habsburg jaw, slightly prominent even in childhood, causing her lips to part awkwardly when she smiled. But she rarely smiled. Her days were measured by mass and lessons, Latin before breakfast, catechism by noon, music in the afternoon, though she never sang. Her voice, they said, was quiet and uncertain, but her mind was sharp, too sharp perhaps. She remembered everything: birthdays, saints' days, funeral rites, obscure political treaties. Her letters from as young as 8 read like missives from a grown woman, full of restraint and subtle unease. By the time she turned 12, she was already being discussed as a bargaining chip. Europe was in turmoil. The 30 Years' Lie, war burned through borders, and Spain, ever embroiled in dynastic struggles, sought to use marriage as a weapon once again. Maria Ana became the centerpiece of multiple negotiations. At one point, she was promised to England's Prince Charles, an unprecedented Catholic-Protestant union, but the match fell apart under the weight of politics and suspicion. Then, in 1631, came the final arrangement. She would marry Ferdinand III of Austria, her first cousin. He was younger, colder, deeply devout. Their union would tighten the Habsburg web once more, drawing Spain and the Holy Roman Empire closer than ever. And so she was sent eastward, across kingdoms and cultures, into a world more rigid than even her own. Vienna received her with grandeur, but not warmth. The court was formal, hierarchical, and steeped in ritual. Maria Ana was foreign in manner, in accent, in prayer. She knelt differently. She crossed herself with a Spanish flourish. Her eyes wandered during ceremonies, and her attendants whispered in Castilian. Some at court called her haughty, others holy, but few called her happy. Her marriage to Ferdinand was distant, polite. He was respectful but emotionally absent. He visited her chambers when duty called, then returned to his council rooms. She wrote to her brother Philip IV of Spain that her husband walks through life as one walks through a cemetery, with reverence and fear. Still, She bore him children. Her first, a son, died after a few weeks. The second, a daughter, lived but never thrived. Then came another son, Ferdinand IV, healthy, bright-eyed, destined to be king. Maria Anna clung to him with a desperation that frightened her ladies. She refused wet nurses, insisted on watching his every breath as he slept. "He is my living soul," she once wrote. Her health declined with each birth. By her late 20s, she could barely walk unaided. Her spine curved painfully. Her hands, once graceful, now twitched involuntarily. Her vision blurred. She suffered fevers, seizures, hallucinations. Some said it was nerves, others divine punishment. Her physicians did not speak of her bloodline. One night, she awoke screaming, convinced the Virgin Mary had bled tears upon her pillow. Her confessor recorded the event with trembling handwriting, unsure if it was a miracle or a symptom. She was moved to a quieter wing of the palace. Visitors were restricted. Her children were kept away. She died in 1646 at the age of 39. The official cause was listed as complications from her final childbirth, but within the Habsburg circles, it was simply called the decline, a soft phrase used often, a way to speak of withering without saying the word aloud. Maria Anna was buried in the imperial crypt in Vienna. Her coffin, like those of so many of her kin, rests in the silence of polished stone halls, where names echo and bones remember. She left behind sons who would wear crowns, daughters who would enter convents, and a lineage that spiraled ever deeper into itself. Her face, painted in oils and framed in Baroque gold, still hangs in Viennese galleries, her eyes turned slightly away, her mouth unsmiling. She was never mad, not in the way legends prefer, but she was tired, bone tired, soul tired, from a life written before she was ever allowed to live it. And now we continue, toward another woman, one whose name became synonymous with empire, excess, and the final crumbling gasp of a dynasty. But let us wait a while longer. Let the torches dim, let the night grow deep, and let Maria Anna's whispered prayers drift quietly through time like threads unraveling from a tapestry too tightly wound. She was born in the flickering candlelight of Schönbrunn Palace, wrapped not in swaddling cloth alone, but in centuries of lineage, ritual, and expectation. Her name was Maria Theresa of Austria. The name would later become legend, etched into marble and memory. But behind the sovereign, behind the titles, behind the 20 children and endless reforms, was a woman whose story began like so many others before her, in a cradle shaped by inbreeding and burden. She was born in 1717, the eldest daughter of Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor, and Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. Her father, determined to secure his family's claim over the Habsburg dominions, had no surviving male heirs. And so, long before Maria Theresa could walk or speak, the pragmatic sanction was issued, an imperial decree that named her the heir to the sprawling Habsburg territories. To secure this, Charles arranged marriages, signed treaties, made concessions. He gave away gold, land, pride, anything that might buy his daughter the right to inherit what his bloodline insisted must remain undivided. The irony, of course, was that it was this same bloodline, so twisted in on itself, that ensured Maria Theresa would spend her entire life walking a tightrope between brilliance and frailty. As a child, Maria Theresa was solemn and radiant. Her hair was pale gold, her voice low and steady, and her eyes carried an intensity that unsettled even her tutors. She was intelligent, naturally so, but her education was limited by her gender. She was not taught statecraft or military science. Instead, she learned French, Italian, music, court etiquette, embroidery. Only in secret did she pore over maps, peer into the ledgers of empire, and listen at her father's keyholes. Her body betrayed the signs of her inheritance: a slightly drooping eyelid, a chin that receded just a touch too far, a weakness in her ankles that made her stumble as a child. She tired quickly, suffered from recurring infections, and displayed a curious rigidity in her spine. The court physician said she was constitutionally soft, yet her will was steel. When she was 19, her father arranged her marriage to Francis Stephen of Lorraine. He was mild, thoughtful, politically inoffensive, and thus ideal. They married in 1736, and while the match was strategic, a quiet affection blossomed between them. Maria Theresa, surprisingly, loved deeply and vulnerably. She gave herself fully to the role of wife, though she would soon have to become so much more. In 1740, her father died. The throne passed to her, and with it, the storm began. Though the pragmatic sanction had been signed and sealed by every major power in Europe, it was immediately ignored. Prussia invaded Silesia. France, Bavaria, Saxony all pounced, hungry for pieces of her vast inheritance. The War of Austrian Succession had begun, and Maria Theresa, 23 and newly pregnant, stood at the eye of it. She was not trained to be a warrior queen, but war shaped her. She rallied troops, rode horses while carrying unborn children, spoke before assemblies in Latin. She wept in private, screamed into pillows, and then emerged each morning composed and resolute. Her body withstood what few believed possible. Pregnancies during sieges, fevers after parliaments, heartbreak after betrayals. In public, she was a lioness, but behind the scenes, her health deteriorated with alarming speed. She suffered migraines so severe she lost vision for hours. Her joints inflamed, her breath shortened. Physicians, unsure of what to make of her constellation of symptoms, prescribed laudanum, hot baths, and prayer. None of it helped. She developed a distaste for certain foods, claiming some meals caused inner tremors. Her hair, once golden, thinned, her skin turned ashen, and still she ruled. Maria Theresa gave birth to 16 children who survived infancy, and 20 in total. Each labor wore her down further. Some births left her bedridden for weeks. One child, born limp and blue, lived only minutes. Another, Maria Josepha, died of smallpox days before her wedding. Yet Maria Theresa remained devout, clinging to Catholic ritual, even as her body bore the scars of relentless expectation. Her children became chess pieces. She married daughters to kings and dukes. One daughter, Maria Carolina, became Queen of Naples. Another, Maria Christina, governor of the Austrian Netherlands. And another, perhaps the most famous, was Marie Antoinette, sent to France to be queen and eventually martyr. In her later years, Maria Theresa's illnesses became more pronounced. She developed edema in her legs. Her chest grew tight. Walking became painful. She began to speak more softly, not from choice but from fatigue. Her attendants noted she often stared out the window for hours, lips unmoving, hands clenched. And yet, until the very end, she ruled. She reformed education, supported the arts, rebuilt the economy, expanded the military, and centralized the empire. She corresponded with philosophers, even as she defended religious orthodoxy. She shaped modern Austria more than any monarch before or after her. She died in 1780 at the age of 63, after a slow and painful decline. Her heart gave out, they said, but those closest to her knew it had been failing for decades. Maria Theresa was buried in the imperial crypt beside her beloved Francis. Her tomb is grand but not ornate, a fitting tribute to a woman whose life was consumed not by glory, but by duty. Her story is remembered as one of triumph, but beneath the surface lies another tale. A woman born of too much legacy, too much expectation, too much pressure on a frame never built for the weight it was asked to carry. Next, we journey toward France again, where the fruit of her womb, Marie Antoinette, will become the most famous casualty of the bloodline they all shared. But for now, rest. Let the torches flicker in the quiet marble halls of Schönbrunn. Let the breath of empires settle once more into stone. She was born in a palace of polished mirrors and unspoken rules, the 15th child of an empress already tired from motherhood, and a father more familiar with numbers than affection. Her name was Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna of Austria, but the world would know her as Marie Antoinette. She arrived in 1755 into the heart of the Austrian Empire, beneath the golden ceilings of the Hofburg Palace. The war-torn years of her mother's reign had begun to quiet, and the empire, for a brief moment, breathed. But Maria Antonia's birth was not heralded with the same thunder as her elder siblings. She was the youngest of the daughters, the final bloom on a branch already heavy with obligation. Her mother, Maria Theresa, loved Hesse, but from a distance. There were too many children, too many affairs of state. Maria Antonia was left in the hands of tutors, governesses, priests. She was taught French, but never mastered it. She was taught music and took to it with joy, but her technique remained unrefined. She was playful, impulsive, and often distracted. She was, above all, a child, bright, curious, and still untouched by the weight of what her blood would demand. She had the look of the Habsburg line, the soft jaw, the high forehead, the wide-set eyes, but hers was a softer version, almost delicate. She was slender, graceful, with light hair that shimmered gold in the Viennese sun. Her laughter came easily. Her worries when they arrived were hidden beneath charm. But even as she played in the palace gardens, even as she danced for visiting ambassadors, her future was already being traded and sealed. France. That was her destination. In 1770, at just 14, Maria Antonia was betrothed to the Dauphin of France, Louis Auguste, grandson of King Louis V. The match was political, a gesture of peace after centuries of enmity between France and Austria. It was not a union born of love or even of compatibility. It was dynastic engineering, pure and cold. Before she left for Versailles, they remade her. Her teeth were straightened painfully, her handwriting drilled into French style. Her name was shortened, her German tutors dismissed. The Austrian court stripped her of identity layer by layer until she emerged as a bride shaped for Versailles, Marie Antoinette, a name foreign to her ears but now affixed forever. Her departure was ritualistic. On the border between Austria and France, she was taken into a pavilion. There, every Austrian object, her clothing, her books, even her undergarments, was removed. She stepped across the threshold reborn, clad in French silk, her old life left behind. The journey to Versailles was lined with celebration, but the palace itself was another matter. Cold, ceremonial, vast. The French court, rigid with etiquette and rank, viewed her with suspicion. She was Austrian, young, and worst of all, untrained in their ways. Her husband, the Dauphin, was shy, awkward, and painfully uninterested in her. Their marriage, unconsummated for years, became a subject of gossip and cruelty. Whispers grew into rumors, and rumors into accusations. Marie Antoinette, still barely 16, found herself alone in a gilded world that smiled and sneered in the same breath. She turned to distraction. She danced, she dressed. She built a private world of music, fashion, and laughter. She created an inner court of favorites, hosted masquerade balls, and escaped the weight of Versailles by retreating to her private estate, the Petit Trianon, where she played at shepherdess among carefully arranged flowers. But the court watched, the people watched, and the more she escaped, the more they condemned. All the while, her body bore the quiet inheritance of her line. She suffered from heavy menstrual bleeding, irregular cycles, and frequent fatigue. She fainted during fittings. Her pregnancies, when they finally came, were long and arduous. Her first child, a daughter, brought her immense joy, but also increased pressure. France wanted a male heir. She delivered a son, then lost another, then a second son. Each pregnancy left her weaker, her skin paled, her nerves frayed. But she still danced, still smiled. She had to. Versailles allowed no other face, and outside the palace, France darkened. The people starved, bread vanished, debts rose, the revolution stirred. Pamphlets accused her of treason, of incest, of witchcraft. They called her l'Autrichienne, the Austrian woman, spitting the word like poison. They mocked her clothes, her voice, her past. She became a symbol, not of royalty, but of decadence. Then the Bastille fell. Then the palace gates. The king and queen were imprisoned. Marie Antoinette aged years in weeks. Her face hollowed, her body trembled, her hair turned white. She stood trial alone, accused of crimes both political and grotesque. She did not cry, not even when her son was taken from her and turned against her. On October 16, 1793, she was led to the scaffold. She wore white. She stumbled once, stepped on the executioner's foot and apologized. "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Then she stood still and waited. The blade fell. She was 37. The girl who once laughed beneath the gardens of Schönbrunn had become the most hated woman in France. But history is not so simple. Beneath the powdered wigs and silk slippers was a woman born of a bloodline that demanded perfection and obedience, but gave her only isolation and sacrifice. She was not a monster. She was not a saint. She was a daughter, a pawn, a mother, a queen. A woman pulled through history by a rope knotted generations before she was born. And now we turn from palaces to shadows, from crowns to darkness. Next we meet a woman so secluded, so altered by inheritance, that the line between human and symbol began to blur completely. But for tonight, rest. Let the flames in Versailles flicker and fade. Let her memory drift with the autumn wind, not as legend, but as a girl, once 13, smiling with borrowed courage at a world she never truly understood. In the quiet corridors of the Hofburg Palace, where marble stairs creaked beneath the weight of centuries, and mirrors reflected only stillness, a girl named Maria Josepha of Bavaria came into the world, cloaked in both wealth and foreboding. Her story is not as widely told as those of queens and empresses, but in its soft descent into silence, it carries the same ancestral weight, a legacy not of glory, but of burden. She was born in 1739, the daughter of Charles II, Holy Roman Emperor, and Maria Amalia of Austria. Her mother was a Habsburg, yet another stitch in the ever-tightening fabric of intermarried European royalty. From both sides of her lineage came the unmistakable signs: a proud forehead, a narrow palate, the slight downturn of eyes that seemed always on the verge of worry. Maria Josepha was not born ill, but she was born delicate. Her lungs rattled in winter. Her appetite was thin. She was pale even by the standards of nobility, her skin almost translucent beneath the lace cuffs of her infancy. And yet she was treasured, if not as an heir, then as a symbol, a bridge between warring houses, a promise wrapped in a cradle of embroidered linen. From the earliest days, her life was measured in preparation for marriage. She was taught music, the prayers of saints, the geography of foreign lands she might one day rule. Her German gave way to French. Her Latin was recited each morning before breakfast. She grew up surrounded by portraits of queens whose expressions stared back with the same still restraint she was learning to master. At 15, she was betrothed. Her husband would be Joseph II, the eldest son of Maria Theresa, heir to the Habsburg crown, and a man both brilliant and emotionally remote. The match was political, but also intended to heal wounds. Joseph's beloved first wife, Isabella of Parma, had died young. Her death had shattered him. The court hoped Maria Josepha might soothe that grief. She entered Vienna as a bride with cautious optimism. She had seen the portraits, heard the whispers. She knew she would be compared to Isabella in everything. But she tried. She dressed modestly, wore her hair in conservative styles, and studied Joseph's interests: science, languages, reform. She smiled when addressed and deferred when he turned away. But behind closed doors, she often wept. Not from cruelty. Joseph was never unkind, but from the heavy void of indifference. Joseph never loved her. He treated her with formal politeness, never warmth. He avoided her chambers. At dinners, he spoke of philosophy and politics, rarely glancing in her direction. Maria Josepha, trained to endure, bore it in silence. But something within her dimmed. She became sick often, and stayed sick longer. Her letters to her mother were sparse, filled with vague phrases. "I am grateful for God's will, and may my presence be of use, if not of joy." She grew thinner. Her complexion faded. Her laughter, once small but real, vanished entirely. She never conceived. Some blamed Joseph, others blamed her. Behind closed doors, the empress whispered prayers for fertility, for miracles. None came. And in a court obsessed with heirs and legacy, Maria Josepha's barrenness was not just a sorrow, it was a threat. Then, in the spring of 1767, came the smallpox. It swept through Vienna like smoke through parchment. Chambermaids, noblemen, children, all fell ill in waves. The court scrambled to isolate the sick, to inoculate the healthy. Maria Theresa wept for her family's safety, for her grandchildren. Maria Josepha, who had never been vaccinated, fell ill within days. Her fever rose quickly. Red pustules bloomed across her skin, first on her hands, then her chest, then her face. Her breathing grew shallow. Her eyes, swollen nearly shut, leaked tears that scalded. Still, she whispered prayers between coughs. Joseph did not come. Whether from fear of contagion or the cold wall that had always existed between them, he did not sit by her side. She died alone, quietly, just shy of her 24th birthday. Her death shocked the court, but only briefly. Within days, the conversation returned to succession, politics, alliances. Her body, covered in veils, was buried in the imperial crypt beside people who had barely spoken to her while she lived. Joseph never mentioned her again. Not in public, not in private. In later writings, he referred to her only once, and then only as my second wife. But Maria Josepha lingers in another way, in portraits left half-finished, in letters sealed with trembling hands, in the memory of a woman who wanted only to be seen, to be touched, to be more than the shadow of a dead queen. She was, in many ways, the embodiment of what inbreeding and dynasty had produced, a figure more ceremonial than human, shaped to fit a mold so narrow that even breath became difficult. And now we leave her. Her candle extinguished not by fate alone, but by centuries of decisions made in marble halls, where blood was thinned not by time, but by repetition. Next, We follow a woman who escaped the halls of Europe for a colder kingdom, one who became empress by marriage and enemy by blood. Until then, let the candles burn low, and let the name Maria Josepha drift like ash into silence. She crossed the ice-laced Gulf of Finland in winter, her carriage wheels groaning over frozen ruts, her hands clenched tightly around a letter she could no longer read. The air was sharp, silent, and full of omen. She was born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst, daughter of a minor German prince, but the world would come to know her as Catherine the Great. Yet before the power, before the legacy, before the transformation into Empress of all the Russias, Catherine was just a girl. And she, too, was born of a family tree that curled too tightly upon itself. A girl raised under the weight of nobility's rituals and its most invisible inheritance, blood designed for politics, not for health. She was born in 1729 in Stettin, then part of the Kingdom of Prussia. Her parents were cousins, as so many noble houses were, and though their court was modest, their expectations were immense. Sophie was meant to be clever, pious, presentable, and most of all, marriageable. From a young age, she stood out, not for beauty, though she had a softness to her features that would later charm foreign courts, but for her will. She questioned her tutors, challenged her confessor, and read books meant for boys. Her body, however, betrayed that same quiet frailty passed down through generations. Frequent fevers, bleeding gums, dizzy spells that came without warning. Her mother dismissed these as exaggerations. Her father, distant and formal, barely noticed. She was 14 when Russia came calling. Empress Elizabeth of Russia, daughter of Peter the Great, was seeking a bride for her nephew and heir, the Grand Duke Peter. Catherine's bloodline was noble enough, and more importantly, she was Lutheran, convertible. The match was proposed, agreed upon. And in 1744, Sophie left everything she knew behind. She arrived in Russia and immediately began to disappear. Her name was changed, her religion rewritten. She was rebaptized into Orthodoxy as Ekaterina Alexievna Catherine. Her German tutors were dismissed, her letters censored, even her accent was retrained. She adapted quickly. She learned Russian in secret, memorized court customs. She was watched at all hours and learned to watch in return. And then she met her husband, Peter. He was 17, awkward, emotionally stunted. His features bore the unmistakable deformities of inbreeding. A jaw too large, a nose too narrow, fingers that curled slightly inward. His behavior swung between childish cruelty and obsessive insecurity. He idolized Prussia, detested Russia, and carried toy soldiers into bed with him. Catherine was expected to love him. She didn't, but she smiled and bore it. Their marriage was a public disaster and a private void. He ignored her, mocked her, left her alone for weeks. Their chambers remained separate. Rumors spread that Peter was incapable, uninterested, or both. The pressure for an heir mounted. Catherine, still only 16, began to fall ill, long fevers, fainting fits, and mysterious pains that her doctors could not name. Still, she studied philosophy, Russian history, the art of governance. She filled notebooks with imagined reforms. She made allies, learned names, remembered faces. She played the game. And then, after years of coldness, she became pregnant. The child, Paul, was born in 1754. Officially, Peter was the father. Privately, many believed otherwise. It didn't matter. Catherine had done what she was supposed to. She had secured the line. But something had shifted. Catherine no longer smiled just to survive. She began to plan. When Empress Elizabeth died in 1762, Peter ascended the throne. His reign was short, chaotic, and widely hated. He insulted the Orthodox Church, betrayed Russian interests, alienated the nobility. And Catherine, calm, patient Catherine, waited. That summer, with quiet military support, she staged a coup. Peter was arrested. Days later, he was dead, officially of natural causes, but no one truly believed that. Catherine was crowned empress, not as consort, but as ruler. She was 33, and for the first time, the world saw the power behind the smile. She ruled for more than 3 decades, modernized Russia's institutions, corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot, expanded the empire's borders, commissioned palaces, paintings, reforms. She became a legend, though never free of whispers. Her health waxed and waned. She suffered from headaches, insomnia, kidney stones. Her joints stiffened, her hands trembled. Some claim she walked with a hidden limp in later years, the old ghosts of ancestral blood catching up with her. But she never showed weakness. never admitted pain. Her body bowed only in death. In 1796, she collapsed in her study. A stroke. She lingered for hours, unable to speak. Her attendants wept silently. At last, the woman who had reinvented herself, her name, her empire, was still. But even in death, Catherine remained a mystery. She was born of blood that fractured minds and bodies, and yet she rose. Not because she was untouched by it, but because she learned to carry it, bend it, even use it. A daughter of inbreeding who refused to fade, a survivor who became a sovereign. And now we leave her beneath the domes of St. Petersburg, where the snow drifts high and the shadows of history grow long. Next, we turn not to a queen or an empress, but to a duchess, whose life was shaped entirely by others, and whose death came too soon to leave more than a whisper. Let the snow fall now. Let the silence deepen. Let the world remember the girl who turned inheritance into empire. She was born into splendor, but never into safety. Her cradle was carved of walnut and lined with lace, but it sat beneath a ceiling already beginning to crack. Her name was Maria Carolina of Austria, one of the many daughters of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Francis I. Yet another pearl threaded into the long, tightening strand of Habsburg ancestry. Born in 1752, she was the 13th child. Her sisters were already promised to foreign thrones, scattered like offerings across Europe. Spain, Parma, France. Her older sister, Maria Josefa, had been intended for Naples, but died of smallpox before the wedding. And so Maria Carolina, young and observant, was chosen instead. There was no pause for grief. The world of diplomacy did not stop for death. It simply rearranged its pieces. From her earliest days, Maria Carolina was trained for rule, not because her future husband would need her mind, but because her blood demanded that she be useful. Her tutors remarked on her energy, her intelligence, her restlessness. She read voraciously. She danced not just with grace, but with focus. She could recite not only the names of saints, but the treaties that had shaped their borders. But always beneath that brilliance lay the same quiet struggle. A body that often ached, hands that swelled, a stomach prone to illness. Her physicians whispered the familiar refrain, delicate constitution, the same phrase used for her sisters, her cousins, her mother before them. She was born of a lineage too narrow, too folded into itself. And though she seemed outwardly healthy, the signs were always there. In 1768, at age 16, she was married to Ferdinand IV of Naples, her first cousin. The marriage was meant to bind Austria to the Bourbon kingdom in southern Italy. Maria Carolina, like her sisters before her, had no say. Ferdinand was crude, uneducated, and impulsive. He was raised in an environment where kingship was a matter of blood, not wisdom, and his behavior often bordered on the animalistic. He hunted constantly, disdained books, and considered politics an inconvenience. When he met Maria Carolina, he laughed at her accent. During their wedding feast, he spat wine across the table. She smiled anyway. But she was not Maria Josefa, nor Maria Antoinette. She did not retreat. She did not weep. She waited. Within months, she had learned the Neapolitan dialect, identified the loyalties of the court, and begun to replace her husband's advisors with her own. She bore him children, 18 in all, though many did not survive. Each pregnancy left her thinner, sicker. Her veins swelled, her spine curved, and her eyesight dimmed. Still, she ruled. After giving birth to a male heir in 1777, she gained access to the state council per the terms of her marriage contract. From that moment on, Maria Carolina became the true power behind the Neapolitan throne. Her husband signed documents she had drafted. She brokered alliances, read military reports, and wrote daily letters to her mother in Vienna. She was a queen in title and a monarch in truth. But even her iron will could not hold back the tide of history. The French Revolution sent shockwaves through Europe. Her sister, Marie Antoinette, whom she had loved and sometimes envied, was executed in Paris. Maria Carolina never recovered from the loss. She wore black for years, refused to speak French in court, and redoubled her efforts to stamp out any sign of republicanism in Naples. The people turned against her. They called her the Austrian woman. They mocked her as a tyrant. Revolutionaries plotted. In 1799, as chaos erupted, Maria Carolina and her family fled Naples by ship under British protection, leaving behind a city that burned with rage. They returned later that year, but the magic had faded. Her body, worn thin from childbirth and stress, began to collapse inward. Her joints stiffened. Her face grew gaunt. She suffered from tremors in her hands and struggled to walk without assistance. Her speech slurred. She was no longer young, and her body, stretched by war, motherhood, and inheritance, offered little mercy. In her final years, she lived in exile once again, this time in Vienna, her childhood home now colder, quieter. Her son had taken the throne. Her husband was mad and senile. Her sisters were dead. The empire she had tried to preserve through diplomacy and marriage had become fractured, bloodied, and unfamiliar. She died in 1814 at the age of 62, just as Napoleon's empire crumbled and the world shifted again. Her body, bent and brittle, was buried with ceremony but little celebration. Maria Carolina is remembered less than her sister Marie Antoinette, but perhaps she bore the greater weight. She lived through revolution, fought back, and watched it all fall apart anyway. Her mind remained sharp long after her body had begun to fail, a curse of her bloodline perhaps, that the spirit survived what the flesh could not. Her legacy, like that of so many women born into dynasties, is a portrait half hidden behind the larger canvas of war and kings. But if one looks closely, the lines of her life are there, stitched in letters, echoing in decrees, woven through the children who did survive her. And so we close her chapter. Next, we descend into a darker corner of history, to a woman born not into power, but into confinement. A princess by name, whose world was no wider than a nursery, and whose voice was rarely heard outside the thick walls of her palace prison. But for now, let the bells of Naples fall silent. Let the tide return. Let Maria Carolina sleep beneath the weight she carried all her life. She was born behind gilded doors, in a chamber where sunlight filtered through embroidered curtains, but could not quite warm the air. Her name was Alexandrine of Baden, and though she wore the title of Grand Duchess, she lived most of her life as a shadow, silent, pale, and nearly forgotten by the world that created her. She came into the world in 1820, in the Grand Duchy of Baden, nestled in the quiet heart of southern Germany. Her family was noble, her father a duke, her mother a duchess, and like so many other houses in Europe, their line had been carefully, rigidly, dangerously managed. Cousin after cousin, uncle after niece, blood curving back onto itself in pursuit of dynastic purity. Alexandrine was born with fine features, porcelain skin, light hair, and large gray eyes that seemed too wide for her face. She did not cry often, nor did she laugh. From her earliest years, she was a quiet child, obedient, withdrawn, and oddly slow to speak. By the age of 4, the family noticed her development lagged behind other children. She struggled to form sentences. Her balance was unsteady. She stared too long at simple objects and sometimes flinched at sounds no one else heard. Doctors were summoned. The court whispered. They called it nervous frailty, a delicate constitution, an affliction of temperament, anything but what it truly was, the result of a bloodline that had spun too many times upon its own axis. By 8, Alexandrine could walk and dress herself, but reading eluded her. She could memorize prayers, repeat stories told to her aloud, and play simple melodies on the harpsichord, but only by rote. Her mind was a garden where flowers bloomed and faded unpredictably. Her governesses were kind but pitied her. The nobility ignored her, and the royal matchmakers passed her over in silence. Still, she was beautiful in a fragile, doll-like way. And in the world of dynasties, beauty was still currency. At 21, she was married to Ernest II, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He was her cousin. He had once been intended for Princess Charlotte of Belgium, then for a number of other noblewomen. In the end, Alexandrine was chosen not for her brilliance or charm, but for her lineage and her willingness to obey. And she did obey. The wedding took place in Karlsruhe. She wore a gown of pale blue silk and silver embroidery. Her veil was hand-stitched in Vienna. She smiled in every portrait, but those who attended said her face remained vacant, her voice little more than a whisper. Their marriage was childless. Ernest was polite, then distant, then entirely absent. He traveled often, hosted parties Alexandrine did not attend, took lovers discreetly, then less discreetly. She remained in the palace, writing letters to her mother, feeding swans in the garden, and reading the same devotional books again and again. She lit candles at dusk and wept when they flickered too suddenly. The court began to murmur. They said she was simple, touched, slow, that her mind had never fully formed. Some pitied her, others scorned her. No one challenged her title, but few honored it with more than ceremony. Yet even in that emptiness, there was grace. Alexandrine never raised her voice. She never showed anger. She gave to the poor. She embroidered linens for orphanages. She visited the sick when cholera swept the countryside. And though she could not rule and could not advise and could not even host a dinner without help, she remained present, unyielding in her gentleness. She outlived many who had mocked her. Ernest died first, then his mistresses, then his brothers. Alexandrine, with her quiet hands and unreadable eyes, continued to walk the palace halls in mourning black, her veil trailing behind her like a memory. She never remarried, never left the duchy, never raised her voice. She died in 1904 at the age of 83. She had no children, no memoirs, no scandals. Her name appears in footnotes, in faded family trees, in brittle portraits where she stands beside her husband, always slightly turned away. But her story, though silent, is a testament to the toll taken on the most vulnerable. She was not a warrior, not a reformer, not even a queen. She was the cost, the quiet proof of what centuries of narrow bloodlines and political calculation could create. A woman whose life was lived entirely behind velvet drapes, breathing carefully, softly, so as not to disturb a world that never made room for her voice. Next, we return to the Spanish court, where the last flickers of the Habsburg line would produce one final, devastating echo. A man whose birth marked the culmination of centuries of intermarriage, and a woman behind him whose own life was quietly shattered in its wake. But for now, let the air grow still. Let Alexandrine's breath vanish into the long corridor of time. Let her rest as she lived, unseen, but not unloved. She was born into a court of incense and decay, her first cries muffled by velvet tapestries and the slow tolling of bells. Her name was Mariana of Austria, Queen of Spain, Empress of Silence, a woman whose face became a symbol of devotion, of tragedy, and above all, of blood that had turned against itself. She was born in 1634 in Vienna, the daughter of Emperor Ferdinand III and Maria Anna of Spain. Her parents were uncle and niece. She, therefore, was the product not only of political strategy, but of generations of marriages that wound back and forth across a single tree until the limbs began to crack. Even as a child, Mariana was quiet, pale, and unsmiling. Her jaw was slightly misaligned, her gait uncertain. Her tutors noted her piety, her discipline, her obedience. But there were gaps in her attention. She would sometimes stop mid-sentence, eyes fixed on something far away. Her hands trembled when she read aloud. She fell ill easily and often. And yet, she was a Habsburg princess, born to be used. At the age of 14, she was betrothed to the King of Spain, but not just any king, Philip IV, her mother's brother, her own uncle. He was 43. His first wife, Elizabeth of France, had died after giving him a single surviving son, Balthasar Charles, who later died as well. With no clear heir and no wish to see Spain fall into the hands of foreign princes, Philip turned to his niece. The bloodline would be preserved, kept pure, even at the cost of nature. And so, Mariana was sent from Vienna to Madrid. The journey was long, and her letters from that time are full of vague fear wrapped in careful courtesy. "I am most honored," she writes, "to serve both God and my family. May he give me strength." Beneath the lines, a different story hums. A child pushed into a world she could not understand. Their marriage was performed with splendor. Paintings were commissioned, bells rung, choirs summoned. Philip, tired and heavy with years, kissed her hand gently. Mariana curtsied with perfect form. She did what was required of her. She bore children. Many died. Her first daughter, Maria Margarita, was born with a curved spine and a weakened heart. She died before her second birthday. The next, another girl, died within days. A boy lived briefly, only to be taken by fever. Each birth drained Mariana. Her back bent, her eyesight blurred. Her hair, once dark and full, began to fall in clumps. Yet she prayed, she smiled, she carried on. Then in 1661, she gave birth to a son, Charles. He would be the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, and through him the weight of every ancestral decision would finally collapse. At first, he seemed normal, pale like her, quiet like her, but soon the signs became too large to hide. His head was enlarged and misshapen, his tongue protruded from his mouth. He drooled constantly. He could not sit upright until the age of 4. He could not walk until nearly 8. He spoke only with difficulty. His lower jaw jutted so far forward that he could not chew properly. His immune system was weak. His mind, slower than most children's by years. The court called it melancholy, delicacy, spiritual struggle. But those who saw him understood. Charles was broken, not by accident, but by design. And Mariana, she became regent. Philip IV died in 1665, leaving the 9-year-old Charles on the throne. Mariana, still only 31, stepped into power, not because she desired it, but because no one else could. She ruled in shadows, through advisors and edicts, while guarding her son like a wounded bird. Her letters from this period are haunting. He does not sleep. He moans in the night. He bites his tongue. I think he dreams of fire. She limited his exposure to the court. She feared illness, feared treachery, feared that one wrong word from him would reveal too much. As Charles aged, awkwardly, slowly, Mariana became more rigid, more isolated. She dressed in black every day after Philip's death. She rarely left the palace. She fasted, confessed, wept, and still she hoped that he might grow stronger, that he might marry, that he might produce an heir. But Charles was incapable of fatherhood. His body, ravaged by generations of inbreeding, could not rise to the task. His semen was said to be watery, lifeless. His body trembled with every movement. His mind remained fragile, easily confused, easily led. He married twice. Both wives left childless and terrified. Mariana watched it all. As power slipped from her grasp, as foreign powers circled Spain like wolves, she clung to faith. She ordered more masses, more relics, more prayers. But inside her, the knowledge grew. This was the end. Not just of a reign, but of a bloodline that had spiraled too far inward, one that mistook purity for survival. She died in 1696, just 9 years before her son. When Charles died, the War of the Spanish Succession erupted. Europe broke apart the Habsburg legacy piece by piece. The line ended, not with a flourish, but with a whimper. Mariana's life was not one of choice. It was one of submission, to family, to dynasty, to belief, and in the end, to silence. She remains one of the most tragic figures in royal history, not because of what she did, but because of what she was asked to bear. And next, we will trace that legacy to the north, into the small courts of Central Europe, where the echoes of this genetic twilight still haunted daughters born into names long stripped of meaning. But now, let Mariana rest. She prayed for peace. May history give it to her at last. In the quiet hills of Central Europe, far from the roaring courts of Versailles and Madrid, there stood a modest palace framed by fog and pine, a place where the air hung heavy with stillness and secrets. It was here, in the Duchy of Württemberg, that a girl named Pauline was born, wrapped in velvet, prophecy, and centuries of caution. She entered the world in 1800, daughter of Duke Louis of Württemberg and Princess Henrietta of Nassau-Weilburg. Her lineage, like so many others in the declining age of aristocracy, was a carefully folded thing, interwoven with Habsburgs, Bourbons, Romanovs. Royal blood coursed through her veins, though it had grown thin with time and repetition. She would grow into one of the last daughters of the old world, when dynasties still believed in their sacred right, but the walls around them had already begun to crack. As a child, Pauline was beautiful in that familiar porcelain way. Delicate jawline, high forehead, pale curls that barely caught the sun. Her eyes, though large and soft, carried a quiet glassiness. She was observant but not expressive, quiet but not shy, and always, even in her youth, she was strangely still. She walked late, spoke little. Her governesses noted a stiffness in her joints, a curious reluctance to engage with other children, and periods of inexplicable exhaustion. Physicians called it sensitive nerves. Her mother called it divine temperament. But the truth lay deeper, in generations of narrow breeding, in names repeated like incantations, until something inside the body began to echo back not strength but slowness. Pauline was educated like any noble girl of her class. History, music, theology, etiquette. She could play the harp, recite Latin hymns, and speak flawless French. But she struggled with memory. Her handwriting, though elegant, was hesitant. Her attention wandered, not with childish curiosity, but with a dreamlike drifting, as if she were forever just a step behind the present moment. By her teens, marriage proposals began to arrive, not for love, of course, but for name and title. And so, at age 19, Pauline was married to her cousin, William I of Württemberg. He was a widower, over a decade older, strong-willed and politically minded. He needed a consort. She needed a role. Their wedding was austere, reflective of the time. Napoleon had just fallen, and the crowned heads of Europe were rebuilding themselves out of war and ruin. Pauline, crowned with pearls, said little during the ceremony. Her voice trembled when she repeated the vows. Her new husband looked at her more like a possession than a partner. Their marriage was marked by indifference. William ruled. Pauline retreated. She gave birth to one child, a daughter named Katharina, in 1821. The labor nearly killed her. Her body, always fragile, never recovered. Afterward, she was often bedridden for weeks at a time. She developed fainting spells, chronic pain in her lower back, and a recurring fever that no physician could cure. Her hair thinned, her face hollowed, her hands grew cold and tremulous, and her mind, too, began to fade. At first, she merely forgot names, then places, then conversations held only minutes before. She would stare at the same page of a book for hours, unmoving. She wept without cause. Her doctors debated, was it melancholia, hysteria, or something older, something rooted not in her own soul, but in her ancestry? William, frustrated and increasingly absent, kept mistresses openly. The court pitied her. They called her the porcelain duchess, as if she were something to admire from a distance but never to touch too roughly. Pauline did not argue. She did not protest. She wandered the palace gardens in solitude, often reciting prayers aloud or speaking to statues. She remained like this for years, present but only just. Eventually, her health worsened. She developed a wasting illness. Some said tuberculosis. Others said it was simply her body giving out from years of quiet strain. Her daughter grew up beside a mother who never raised her voice, never held her with strength, never gave more than a faded smile. Pauline died in 1873 at the age of 73. Her funeral was simple, fitting. She was buried beneath a rose window in the ducal chapel, her name engraved in white marble, surrounded by ancestors whose own lives mirrored hers, daughters of power, wives of indifference, women shaped by centuries of blood that ran too narrow. She left behind no legacy of power, no reforms, no scandal, only a single child and a handful of letters written in careful script filled with lines like, "I feel myself drifting away before the body gives permission." Pauline was one of the last quiet women of her line, of any line. Her life was not a grand stage, but a sealed room. A slow unraveling of what happens when the walls are too close, the air too thin, and the past too heavy. Next, we will return to France once more, where a princess born into post-revolution grandeur would find herself trapped by the same inheritance, carrying the same slow erosion, under new banners and familiar shadows. But tonight, let us walk once more through the quiet gardens of Württemberg. Let the moonlight touch her stone, and let her story fall like ash back into silence. She was born in the glittering aftershock of a shattered monarchy, in a France trying desperately to remember how to breathe. Her name was Marie-Thérèse Charlotte of France, the daughter of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the child of a broken throne, a fading dynasty, and a bloodline stretched thin by time, by history, and by centuries of narrowing lineage. She was not simply a princess, she was a relic, living proof that royalty could suffer, bleed, and remain. She came into the world in 1778 at the Palace of Versailles, in a bedchamber lined with guilt and expectation. Her birth was considered a disappointment. Her mother wept because the child was not a son, but quickly composed herself, knowing her duty was not joy but legacy. They named her Marie-Thérèse Charlotte after her maternal grandmother, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. The name was heavy, the blood heavier. As a child, she was sharp-eyed and solemn. Her nurses noted how little she cried, how easily she memorized, how she often sat in silence longer than any child should. She walked early, spoke with unusual precision, and clung fiercely to her mother. Though she was surrounded by luxury, dolls, and diamond-crusted ribbons, Marie-Thérèse had the demeanor of someone older, as if born with the knowledge of what would come. She was still a child when the storm broke. In 1789, revolution shook the cobblestones of Paris. Her family, once untouchable, once divine, was driven from Versailles under armed guard. She rode beside her parents in the carriage, hands clasped, silent as the crowd screamed around them. They were brought to the Tuileries Palace, then to the Temple prison, where the world grew smaller, colder, darker. At age 13, Marie-Thérèse watched as her father was taken from their prison cell and never returned. She never saw his execution, but she heard it, heard the distant roar of the crowd when the blade fell. A few months later, her mother was led away. Marie Antoinette kissed her daughter's forehead, smoothed her hair one last time, and whispered, "Courage, my child." Then she too was gone. Marie-Thérèse was left with her aunt, Elizabeth, and her younger brother, Louis Charles, who would be declared Louis Sesef by royalists. But even that shred of family would not remain. Louis Charles, the boy king, was taken from her. He was isolated, tormented, neglected, and when he died 2 years later, alone, ill, and frightened, the revolutionaries did not even record it with dignity. His body, when finally found, bore scars. His brain, when later examined, showed damage from abuse, and still the monarchy tried to persist through memory alone. Marie-Thérèse was now the last living child of the King and Queen of France, and so they kept her, locked away in a tower, alone. From age 15 to 17, she was held in complete isolation. No books, no letters, no visitors, only silence and the slow ticking of hours. When she was finally released in 1795, exchanged for political prisoners and sent into exile, she emerged pale, trembling, half a ghost. Her once bright eyes seemed dulled. Her skin had lost its color. Her voice, when she spoke, had the even tone of someone who had stopped dreaming. She was sent to Austria, her mother's homeland, but it was no home. The court welcomed her with politeness, but kept her at a distance. She was a reminder of failure, of guillotines, of revolutions that even the great Habsburg name could not prevent. She was soon married to her cousin, Louis Antoine, Duke of Angoulême. Another safe union, another cousin, another loop in the endless braid of royal blood. He was gentle but distant. They shared memories but not warmth, and their marriage, like so many before, was childless. Marie-Thérèse never spoke publicly about what happened in the temple, not about the smell, the hunger, the sound of her brother sobbing in the night. But in private, she wrote obsessively, pages of prayers, memories, names. Some said she kept lists of those she had lost. Some said she heard her mother's voice in her dreams, over and over, "Courage, my child." After Napoleon's defeat, she returned briefly to France during the Bourbon Restoration. For a time, she walked the halls of the Tuileries again, older, thinner, always dressed in black. The people called her Madame Royale. Some cheered, others stared. She never smiled. When her uncle Charles VI abdicated in 1830, she fled France for the last time. She died in 1851 in exile in Austria, where her life had begun again after it had ended in Paris. No children, no heirs, no throne, just memories and the heavy, undying weight of survival. Marie-Thérèse was not born of obvious frailty, but what she inherited was more than weak bones or shallow blood. She inherited silence. She inherited loss. She inherited the long unraveling of a world that had demanded her loyalty, then stripped her of everything. She was the last daughter of the Ancien Regime, the final witness. And now we follow one more voice in the chain, a girl who would live not in palaces, but in paintings. A duchess painted again and again as her body broke and her mind folded inward, a portrait of stillness in a world long past saving. Let us leave Marie-Thérèse to her rest. The tower is empty now. The echoes have faded, but her silence remains. She was born into a painting before she was ever born into life. A daughter of prestige, a subject of canvas, a child of mirrors and stillness. Her name was Maria Anna of Bavaria, Duchess of Bavaria and Electress Palatine, though few remember her by title. More remember the portrait, the girl in stiff satin, framed by roses, her body unmoving, her face half dreaming. In a world that prized appearance over breadth, she was perfect, too perfect. Maria Anna came into the world in 1660, in Munich, the capital of the Bavarian court. Her father, Ferdinand Maria, was Elector of Bavaria, a ruler of precision and political tact. Her mother, Henriette Adelaide of Savoy, was of Italian nobility, known for her beauty, piety, and Habsburg blood. Maria Anna was their first daughter, and from the moment she opened her eyes, the court saw not a child, but an heirloom, an extension of legacy. She was born pale and quiet. Her nurses remarked on her stillness, her refusal to fuss. Her bones seemed too fine, too slender, and her limbs did not move easily. She learned to sit later than her cousins, and when she did, she often slumped to one side. Her speech was slow, her gaze delayed, yet her beauty was undeniable. By the age of 5, she was already being painted, immortalized in oil, wearing garments that weighed more than she did. She posed without protest, her small hands folded, her back propped carefully by hidden cushions. Her face was calm, blank, perfectly composed. She was a model of serenity, even as her governesses whispered of her frequent illnesses and fragile appetite. Her family refused to see weakness. Infirmity was not fitting for a duchess, let alone a daughter of the widow's box and Savoys. So her ailments were renamed. She was delicate, sensitive, spiritually gifted. Her fainting spells were attributed to divine favor. Her quietness became modesty. Her uncoordinated steps were blamed on corsets too tight, floors too polished, nothing more. When she was 16, a match was made. Maria Anna would marry Louis, the Dauphin of France, heir to the most powerful throne in Europe. The French court required a bride of noble lineage, strong Catholic ties, and unquestionable virtue. Maria Anna fulfilled these with pedigree to spare. The alliance between Bavaria and France would cement power across borders, and she would become the new flower of Versailles. But Versailles did not want a wilting flower. When the French ambassador visited Munich to observe the future bride, he wrote in his private report, "Her complexion is radiant, her manner graceful, but her voice is small, and she seems often to lose her place in conversation." The court in Paris hesitated. Rumors followed that she could not bear long carriage rides without illness, that she did not stand unaided for more than 10 minutes, that her hands shook when she held a teacup, that she wept in confusion when asked to read aloud in French, that she had once fainted simply from the scent of roses. The marriage was quietly canceled. No formal reason was given. Maria Anna never left Munich. Instead, she was promised to her cousin, Maximilian II Emmanuel, a military man and future elector. The match was safe, contained. The family line would remain intact. They were married in 1685 in a ceremony attended by every court of note, every dignitary worth naming. Maria Anna wore a gown embroidered with silver thread and pearls the size of almonds. Her smile, captured again in portrait, seemed slightly too still. Their marriage was one of routine, not passion. Maximilian traveled often. He fought in wars, commanded armies, governed provinces. Maria Anna remained in Munich, rarely seen outside the palace, growing thinner, paler, more elusive. She bore 7 children. Each birth weakened her further. Her hips ached, her teeth loosened. Her fingers curled inward, slowly and permanently. She began to speak less, even to her own ladies. When she stood, it was with assistance. When she walked, she clutched walls and rails. Her final child, born in 1691, nearly killed her. She was 29. After that, she vanished from court life. Her apartments were kept dark. Candles burned low. The mirrors were covered. The children were brought in only occasionally, their visits brief and quiet. Maria Anna sat in a chair beside the window, not looking out but inward, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. She died in 1690, a year before her youngest child. The cause was listed as a wasting illness, but everyone knew. Her body had never truly belonged to her. It was painted, dressed, positioned, adorned, but never nurtured. It had carried the weight of inheritance, of diplomacy, of motherhood. And in the end, it could carry no more. Her portraits remain. One hangs in a Bavarian gallery, Maria Anna at 10 in green silk, one hand resting on a bouquet of flowers. Her expression is unreadable. Her eyes soft and distant. She is both present and not, a symbol, not a girl. And that is how they remembered her. Not in speeches, not in legacy, but in silence. Still, painted silence. Next, we return to Spain, one last time, to the final ember of a family line that had long since burned itself out. A king whose body could not carry his crown, and the woman behind him who bore witness to the final breath of the Habsburgs. But tonight, let the brushes rest. Let the paint dry. Let Maria Anna remain in her frame, perfect, unmoving, eternal. He was born beneath the shadow of an empire already collapsing under its own weight. Not with thunder or fanfare, but with a silence so profound it would echo across all of Europe. His name was Charles. Carlos II. Charles II of Spain, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, the final breath of a dynasty that had twisted in on itself for too long. And beside him, through the long, slow unraveling of his life, was a woman, Marie-Louise of Orleans, his first wife, whose heart broke long before her body followed. This is not a story of power. It is a story of the absence of it. Charles II was born in 1661, the long-awaited male heir to Philip IV and Mariana of Austria. A miracle, the court proclaimed. But from his first moments, that miracle was lined with dread. He did not cry right away. His head was misshapen, his tongue too large for his mouth. He could not nurse properly. His limbs flailed, unfocused and weak. His bones were soft, his eyelids drooped. The court physicians tried to hide it. The priests baptized him hastily. And Spain, desperate to believe, dressed him in gold-threaded swaddling and called him El Hechizewich, a name that said more than they meant it to. For surely, they thought, no boy born of such noble blood could be so broken. But Charles was broken, not by witchcraft, by blood. He was the product of over 200 years of Habsburg intermarriage. His parents were uncle and niece. His grandparents were double cousins. His ancestry read like a circle, not a tree. And within that closed loop, the body forgets how to build itself. Bones grow soft, jaws protrude, minds wander. Charles didn't walk until he was 4. He didn't speak clearly until he was 8. He drooled constantly. He had seizures, sometimes daily. His jaw was so misaligned that he could not chew. His meals were mashed into paste. He had no education, for no tutor could hold his attention. He was prone to long silences, confused stares, and moments of rage followed by sobbing. And yet, he was king. His mother, Mariana of Austria, ruled as regent for much of his early life. She kept him sheltered, hidden from the public, surrounded by monks and servants who whispered prayers over his bed. He was never alone, not because he needed companionship, but because no one could trust what he might do or say. At 17, the crown arranged his marriage. His bride would be Marie-Louise of Orleans, daughter of the Duke of Orleans, niece of Louis XIV of France. She was young, lovely, fluent in court manners, and skilled in music. Her role was clear. She was to bring an heir. She was to save the Spanish crown from extinction. She was not told everything. When she arrived in Madrid in 1679, she was struck by the solemnity of the court, the stillness, the morbid devotion to ritual. And then she met her husband. He shuffled toward her with effort. His eyes could not hold hers. His tongue hung from his mouth. His hair, unkempt, was already graying. He tried to speak, but the words came out slurred. He smiled, and she recoiled before she could stop herself. But she curtsied. She married him. And she tried. For years she tried. She tried. She sang for him. She read to him. She held his hand through seizures. But nothing blossomed between them. Not affection. Not understanding. And certainly not children. Charles was infertile, perhaps incapable altogether. His body was a wreckage of inheritance. And Marie-Louise, trapped in the cold, severe etiquette of the Spanish court, began to wilt. Her appetite vanished. Her hair thinned. Her letters home became increasingly desperate. She wrote, "I am buried alive." There were no dances, no joy, no escape. Her attendants were monitored, her movements restricted. And though Charles adored her in his own way, bringing her gifts, pleading with her to be happy, his presence exhausted her. His fragility was a mirror of everything she had been taught to fear. In 1689, she died, suddenly, at the age of 26. The official cause was a fever. Some said cancer, others whispered poison. But those who knew her understood she had simply stopped. Her body, after years of quiet suffocation, let go. Charles wept uncontrollably at her funeral. He refused to eat for days. He locked himself in his chambers with her portrait. He was inconsolable. He remarried to another princess, Maria Anna of Neuburg, but she too bore no children. Charles continued to decline, physically, mentally, spiritually. His body twisted with disease. His face sagged, yellowed. His hair fell out. His legs trembled. He lost his teeth. He spoke rarely. He heard voices. At the end, he believed himself possessed. He demanded exorcisms. The court, desperate, complied. He died in 1700 at 38, with no heir, no legacy, just the final punctuation mark of a sentence written in the language of dynastic obsession. With Charles, the Spanish Habsburg line ended, and so too ends our journey, from Juana the Mad to Maria Theresa, from Elizabeth of Russia to Marie Antoinette, from infant queens to widowed duchesses. We have walked through centuries of silence, into chambers heavy with incense and sorrow, across bloodlines that bent too far inward. We have met women whose names were carried by empires, but whose voices were lost to history. And though their portraits still hang on palace walls, they do not smile. They do not speak. But now, perhaps, we have heard them. Let the halls fall quiet once more. Let the candle burn low. Let them sleep.